Can you all hear me now? So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Okay. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Council Sanchez, did you have another comment?
Well, I haven't made any yet, but I have two concerns. One is there's the threshold question of whether promulgation of a TMDL constitutes rulemaking. And if the commission were to decide that it does, then the requisite 60-day notice would not have been met. I'm not aware that the Environment Department has published the requisite notice. So there's that question. And there's the question of whether the commission can essentially amend an agenda item to have a hearing when that isn't indicated on the agenda, and that may well be a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
No, those are very good points that I need to address. I see Council Weatherly has another comment, but I did want to note that the commissioners in the packet that we were sent didn't include number 9. And I know this is the weird question about whether or not it constitutes a rulemaking and how we proceed down that path until that issue is resolved. But so given those 2 points that the commissioners didn't receive the material, although it is available on our website, so there's that sort of disconnect there. It wasn't part of the packets, and then we want to make sure it's appropriately noticed. So Council Weatherly, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. I just wanted to suggest that for agenda item 9, that our intention was to address the question of whether or not the TMDL, it should be considered a regulation, and maybe we could keep that on the agenda, and then if you agree that a hearing is warranted, then we can request that for a future commission meeting date.
Okay, and it's kind of bringing back memories of when I was reviewing this last week, that I remember thinking they must be planning to address that issue rather than go to hearing. And so I think that is an appropriate path forward if Council Sanchez, you agree that we can have the discussion on the request to have the hearing and discuss that on today's agenda.
If the discussion, the commission's discussion and deliberation is limited to the sole question of whether that petition is appropriate, given the Court of Appeals decision and the related 10th Circuit opinion, I think we can proceed. I do have a slight concern that that is not noticed in the agenda, but I think as broadly as the agenda item is noted, it should encompass that initial question.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Fry, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Madam. I just want to verify I'm seeing the correct documents. And this is under 2233, is that correct? And there's 3 items dated 9/30/22. Are those the items in question that Pamela had uploaded for the docketed materials?
That is the correct docket number, yes, 22-33.
Okay, and can Pamela confirm that the 9/30/22 items are the 3 items we're looking at for this? Okay, she's shaking her head, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Given this discussion, do I have I guess we actually do have a motion and a second on the table to proceed with the agenda as written, with item number 9 remaining the same. with that, Pam, shall we have a roll call vote on the motion to approve the agenda?
Okay. Commissioner Brankert, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Yes.
Commissioner Modi? Commissioner Patton? Commissioner Rader?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil?
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik?
Yes.
Chair Stringer?
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Sounds like you're not feeling well, so thank you for your dedication and staying here even despite how you're sounding. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the September 13th, 2022 minutes. Any discussion? Commissioner Brancard.
Madam Chair, I would just note that, following from our previous item, that we did have a whole discussion about the status of the TMDLs under, was it other matters or something at the end? And the commission did direct Council Sanchez under item 8 to provide us with a copy, all the members with a copy of his analysis. So if we could just add a sentence or so to that effect, that would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner Brancard. So many documents open. The meeting minutes. Is there further discussion? Okay, so, I was gonna say, Commissioner Brancard, do you have a specific language to create a motion to revise the minutes accordingly?
I guess you could just add a sentence that said the commission discussed the status of the TMDL application and directed Counselor Sanchez to submit his analysis to the commission members.
Any further discussion? Do I have a motion to approve as amended?
Madam Chair, I
Commissioner
would make
Dominguez?
a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Brancard. Pam, shall we have a roll call vote to approve the meeting minutes as amended to include a statement that Council Sanchez will provide his analysis on the TMDL?
Got it. Here we go. Commissioner Brankard?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Yes.
Commissioner Patton? Commissioner Patton, how do you vote? I didn't hear you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Rader?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil?
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik?
Yes.
Chair Stringer? The motion passes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have an opportunity for the public to provide comment Are there any members of the public who have indicated or would like to indicate that they would like to provide public comment during this meeting? Hearing none and seeing no hands, I think we can move on. Okay, just checking the chat as well. Okay. That concludes that agenda item. Next up, we have number 5, WQCC 22-21, opposed motion on behalf of petitioners, concerned citizens for nuclear safety, and honor our Pueblo existence to vacate the stay of proceedings. And Pam, you're listed as lead for this, and I understand you have a statement to make as well.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. In this permit appeal, the commission granted the opposed motion to stay proceedings pending resolution of the appeal currently before the EPA's appeal board. And a decision is expected in the next 6 weeks. So sort of a brief timeline, the order on the motion to stay proceedings pending resolution of related adjudication was filed on August 30th. And then the hearing officer was appointed afterwards. And then CCNS and HOPE's opposed motion to vacate the stay of proceedings was filed on September 24th. The responses by the parties to this motion are due today, October 11th. And the moving party's reply is due on October 21st. The NMAC Rule 20.1.3.15 requires briefing on this issue to be complete on the 21st of October. So this matter will be ready for the commission to deliberate at its regularly scheduled meeting in November. That's Tuesday, November 8th. Unless the commission gives the hearing officer the authority to decide the renewed motion to vacate the stay.
Okay, so if I understand your statement, Pam, the track is already set. We've already made this decision in that matter, and the proceeding is proceeding. And we have the option to allow the hearing officer to consider this new request that was presented to the commission today. I guess I'm not sure what the other alternative option is for the commission. Is that just a statement that that's really how it should proceed? And I see Council Sanchez has turned his camera on, and I would love to hear his counsel on this matter.
Me too, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't completely understand the administrator's reason for setting out that timeline. I'm looking at the order on motion to stay proceeding, and that matter has been stayed until the related adjudicatory proceeding in before the EAB is concluded. So I guess I'm a little confused on the question of the pending motion. I would like to hear from the commission on this, but it seems to me like we've now seen the petitioners make the same argument under different guises. The substance is essentially the same. Normally, I would consider that motion a dispositive motion, but to the extent that the substance of the arguments have essentially already been deliberated on and considered and decided by the commission, it may well just be a procedural motion which would allow the hearing officer to decide it. Again, if the commission views this as a dispositive motion, then it would have to be the commission to decide it. Thank you.
So I agree. I believe that we have decided on this matter, and as indicated on the agenda, there's no anticipated action by the commission. Although Pam, in your statement, you reference a proposal for us to allow the hearing officer to consider this. And so that was the confusing part. So it sounds to me, based on Council Sanchez's guidance, that the proceeding shall continue as already established, and there is in fact no action for the commission to take today on this matter. So, given that,
Chair Stringer, again,
yes,
the important
Sanchez.
the important proviso here or condition is that the commission needs to, I think, decide whether that the present motion is essentially a refashioning of the same arguments substantially. And if so, then I think it's procedural. If they think there's different legal or factual basis for the motion, then I think it becomes a dispositive motion or potentially a dispositive motion, and the commission would need to decide. So that's the very important proviso, if you will. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lovejoy, I see your hand up, but I'm going to first ask the commissioners if they have any further discussion, given that we have already made a decision on the matter. Commissioner Brancard, please proceed.
Thank you. The way I read this motion is it is effectively a motion to have the commission reconsider its decision whether to stay this case. And I think the proper procedure in that order would be that this remain before the commission, and it would require the people who voted in favor of the stay to make a motion to reconsider. But the briefing is not complete, so we don't need to consider this till the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have a comment? Commissioner Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to kind of help explain what our commission administrator walked through, because I did the same thing. Based on the timing of the filing of this motion, the response to the motion deadlines and then the reply to the response deadline pushes things out where it would not allow action on this until the November, just in order for the response deadlines to be met. So if that helps clarify the points that Pam brought up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. This is a confusing matter for sure. Council Sanchez, you have your hand up. Did you have additional comment?
No, my apologies. I had just forgotten to lower my hand, my virtual hand. I don't have additional comments.
Thank you. So given what everyone has indicated, it sounds like this agenda item should be added to the November meeting. I will, Mr. Lovejoy, allow you to provide a brief comment in response to this agenda item, but please keep your comments brief.
I'll just, if I may, read a paragraph from the most recent order, declining to consider the motion to reverse. In this order, the commission ruled and found, quote, at no time subsequent to the issuance of the order on motion to stay proceedings did petitioners seek a lift or modification of the stay of the adjudicatory proceedings before the commission, nor did they challenge or otherwise seek relief from that stay, either before the commission or in any other administrative or judicial forum. Our motion to vacate the stay is filed in response to the commission's statement. This is not a repetition, and it's certainly not the same as our motion for reversal. That will come if the stay is vacated.
Thank you, Mr. Lovejoy. Council Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would only note that that language is in there because prior to the filing of the motion, they had not sought that relief. So it's really a matter of chronology. That motion, I think, appropriately should have been filed prior to, not subsequent. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. So to conclude this matter, this agenda item will be placed on the November agenda. Council Sanchez, did you have more?
Yes, Madam Chair. To the extent that it is on today's agenda and it's being moved to the next meeting, the appropriate procedure would be to entertain a motion to postpone rather than to table. Postpone because it's being moved to the next meeting, so it's a time certain. So if you would entertain a motion to postpone, please.
Okay. Let's see.
And I see several hands.
Yes, Commissioner Cipher, Vice Chair Cipher.
Yes, Chair Stringer, I would simply like to make a motion to postpone to the November meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Brancard.
Second,
Pam, shall we have a roll call vote on the motion to add this to the, postpone this to the November meeting?
Yes. Commissioner Brancard, how do you vote?
yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams,
Yes.
Commissioner Patton.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Rader,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil,
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik,
Yes.
Chair Stringer.
Yes,
The motion passes.
thank you. Okay, next up, I think we have a more straightforward agenda item, which is the update on the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And to present that agenda item, we have Council Weatherly from NMED. Please proceed, Council.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. My name is Crystal Weatherly, and I'm an attorney with the New Mexico Environment Department. And I am counsel today for the Surface Water Quality Bureau on 4 matters before you, which are agenda items 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I wanted to take a moment to clarify that these are separate agenda items and they are not under the WQCC docketed matter 22-33, which is the TMDL. And the reason I am making that clarification today is that our NMED OPF website has these matters all under that docketed matter for the TMDL, and the Bureau just wanted to clarify that they are not part of that TMDL matter. I hope that made sense. And as we discussed earlier today, for agenda item number 9, when we get to that, I will address Commissioner Brancard's question from the Commission's August meeting regarding TMDLs as regulations. As you know, the Commission is a state water pollution control agency for all purposes of the Federal Clean Water Act. And responsibilities for activities involving surface water are delegated to the department's Surface Water Quality Bureau. For agenda item number 6, I would like to introduce Ms. Shelley Lemon, who is the Surface Water Quality Bureau Chief, and she will be presenting an update on the 50th anniversary of the Federal Clean Water Act and the Surface Water Quality Bureau celebration of Month of Clean Water Information and Activities. In preparation for this presentation, the Bureau submitted a PDF of its PowerPoint presentation to the Commission in advance. Following the presentation, Ms. Lemon will be available to answer any questions that the Commission or anyone else may have. And with that, I will hand it over to Ms. Lemon.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Pam, can I have the ability to share my PowerPoint presentation?
You should have it.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. So can you all see my presentation right now?
No.
No.
Oh, man. Okay, just a minute. It was sharing. Let's try this again. Is that working now?
Not yet for me.
No.
Nope.
It says it's thinking, I think, because there is a red or orange square around my screen. And if this doesn't work, let me see if I can try maybe a PDF. Internet seems to be slow in our building today. Let's see.
I have noticed issues in this building.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, let's see. I'm sorry for the pause. It is not connecting, and I don't know how to make it connect. It looks like it's connecting on my end, which is really funny. Hmm.
Ms. Lemon, maybe I can share from my connection as I'm not in the building with you.
Okay, excellent.
Members of the Commission, if you could just give us a moment so I can bring up her presentation.
We shall pause. I do see Commissioner Frey has her hand up, so I don't, Fry, sorry, I've mispronounced your name. Sorry about that. But we'll go ahead and take your comment while they're working through the technical issues.
I was just gonna ask if it would help if they turned off their video, if maybe that would help with their connection.
I can try that. Just a minute. Let me see. And it's not working. It's still not working on my end, apparently. Even when I don't have the video on.
Pam, do we have to grant Crystal sharing capabilities? I assume you probably have, but just in case.
Well, actually, let me do that. That would be, thank you. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the uptake today. Crystal, Ms. Weatherly, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Thank you.
Gotta love technology.
I apologize.
Yes.
I have got the PowerPoint up, and so now I'm learning how to share my screen. Let's see.
And Madam Commissioner, and we do have the presentation up on the website. Oh, there she's starting to share
Yep,
content.
I
Okay,
can see the presentation now.
excellent. Okay, I'm sorry for that delay in technology. Um, Good morning, commissioners. My name is Shelley Lemon. I am the Surface Water Quality Bureau Chief for the New Mexico Environment Department. And this presentation is going to provide some information on the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act and also a brief introduction to the objectives and goals of the Clean Water Act. Next slide, please. So October 18th marks the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And as part of this celebration, the New Mexico Environment Department Surface Water Quality Bureau is organizing a media campaign surrounding the 50th anniversary in New Mexico to put clean water in the forefront of our social media content and to promote awareness and acknowledgement that clean water is a human right and should be supported and protected. So October is targeted for the Month of Clean Water campaign. Next slide, please. In response as part of this anniversary celebration, Governor Lujan Grisham issued a proclamation declaring October 2022 the Month of Clean Water in celebration of the Clean Water Act. And the Surface Water Quality Bureau is organizing several different activities during the month of October. The first being soliciting personal water stories that we will highlight either during the month or in our special edition of Clearing the Waters newsletter later this winter. And people can submit their personal water stories to the NMED's public comment portal. We've also created a website for the Clean Water Act 50th anniversary celebration, and there is a button on the Surface Water Quality Bureau's main page to take you to that website. We are also going to be releasing content each week in the month of October. And last week we were highlighting the past 50 years, what's happened since the Clean Water Act was enacted. And then in weeks 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be highlighting the present, beginning with protecting clean water this week. And on Saturday, the Bureau is going to have a demonstration day at Patrick Smith Park along the Santa Fe River, just to connect with the community and people who are out there enjoying our water resources. And we'll also be talking about financing and restoring clean water. And then in week 5, we'll be distributing content that is looking to the future. Like I said previously, we're developing a special winter edition of our Clearing the Waters newsletter, which will highlight stories and memories from the public solicitation. And the Surface Water Quality Bureau is also seeking a volunteer or volunteers for a WQCC interview to be highlighted during this celebration. If you're interested, just let me know. It shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. I can also send you a questionnaire that you can fill out on your own time and return to me. So it should be pretty straightforward and won't take much of your time. Next slide, please. If you're interested, you can follow the NMED social media accounts listed for more information on our celebration activities in October for our month of clean water, or follow the address provided at the bottom of the slide to check out our 50th anniversary Clean webpage. Next slide, please. So this is where I'm transitioning to a little bit of history and what the Clean Water Act has done. So before the Clean Water Act, it was common practice to dump raw sewage into our nation's rivers Ohio's Cuyahoga River, which is pictured here, was so polluted with oil and grease that it caught fire more than a dozen times. Waters as large as Lake Erie were so full of industrial pollution and untreated sewage and farm runoff that they were declared functionally dead. The Potomac River in Washington, D.C. was filled with smelly algal blooms and raw sewage every summer, and rivers throughout New England were so polluted that they actually peeled paint off of nearby buildings. Flood-absorbing wetlands were destroyed at an alarming rate before the Clean Water Act. Nearly 500,000 acres were lost annually. Then in 1972, after decades of widespread pollution and contamination, the Republicans and Democrats united to address this public health and ecological crisis by passing the Clean Water Act to protect our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands from pollution and destruction. The photo depicting the Cuyahoga on the right shows the water quality improvement in recent years and the dramatic impact that the Clean Water Act has had on historically one of the most polluted rivers in the United States. Next slide, please. So past 50 years ago, the Clean Water Act is our most important tool we have to protect our waters. The Clean Water Act holds polluters accountable, enhances drinking water quality, protects habitat for fish and other wildlife, and sustains our economy. The fundamental objective of the Clean Water Act is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters, which includes streams, rivers, lakes, and wetlands in New Mexico. The Clean Water Act has brought our waters back to life by upgrading 16,000 wastewater treatment plants to secondary treatment, implementing technology-based effluent limits for discharges, establishing a point source program and upgrading sewage treatment, and improving fish habitat and populations. Although even today, not all waters are fishable, but at least they're not flammable. And because of the Clean Water Act, the number of places that meet the clean water goals has doubled. The cost to treat our drinking water is lower because our waters are healthier and cleaner. And as water quality has improved, fish and wildlife have rebounded. Next slide, please. So in order to achieve the fundamental objective, the Clean Water Act has a lofty goal to eliminate the discharge of pollutants into surface waters by 1985. I think we can all agree that we're never going to reach zero discharge of pollutants. It's really an unrealistic goal that can never be achieved, but states and EPA are committed to controlling and mitigating the discharge of pollutants to meet water quality standards. And the Clean Water Act makes it illegal to intentionally dump pollution from a point source, like factories or city sewers, into our nation's waters without a permit. The law also prevents wetlands from being filled in or paved over to create dry land for development or farming without first getting a federal permit. The Clean Water Act also sets the goal to provide for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and for recreation in and on the water. Those are the fishable, swimmable goals that we often talk about in the Surface Water Quality Bureau. It directs states and territories to adopt water quality standards, requires cleanup plans for water bodies that don't meet water quality standards, like the total maximum daily load, or TMDLs, that we're talking about here today. It funds important grant programs to help states, territories, and tribes implement Clean Water Act programs, and helps communities build and upgrade wastewater infrastructure nationwide through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Loan Program. It also provides opportunities for meaningful public engagement. Next slide. So this slide outlines some of the key sections of the Clean Water Act. I wanted to point out a couple that the Surface Water Quality Bureau implements regularly through the Water Quality Control Commission and also through implementation of the water quality standards. So Section 101 of the Clean Water Act outlines the fundamental objectives and supporting goals. Section 106 are grants from EPA for pollution control programs. Those include programs in the Bureau, such as monitoring the water quality, assessing water quality, developing and revising water quality standards, developing total maximum daily loads, and looking and listing our impaired waters list, and also point source regulation. Section 303 has water quality standards requirements. It also talks about the list of impaired waters and TMDL requirements. Section 319 is for the non-point source pollution management program, which you'll be hearing about later today. We also have Section 401, which is state certification of federal permits. So reminding you that, in New Mexico, we do not have a permit program. So the federal government issues permits under the Clean Water Act in New Mexico, and the state certifies those permits to make sure that they are meeting state law and state regulations. Section 402 is the NPDES program. Again, that program is administered by EPA in New Mexico. Section 404 are permits for dredge and fill material. That is administered by the Army Corps of Engineers in New Mexico. And then Section 604 are grants for our water quality management planning, and that helps to fund our total maximum daily load program. Next slide, please. So this is just a short summary of the Clean Water Act. Basically, the Clean Water Act is a statute whose fundamental objective is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. It provides the basic structure for regulating the discharge of pollutants and makes it illegal to intentionally discharge pollutants from a point source into our nation's waters without a permit, and also prevents wetlands from being filled in or paved over to create dry land without first getting a federal permit. The Clean Water Act sets a goal to provide for the protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and for recreation in and on the water. It directs states and territories to adopt water quality standards, requires cleanup plans for water bodies that don't meet water quality standards like TMDLs, funds important grant programs to help states, territories, and tribes implement Clean Water Act programs, helps communities build and upgrade wastewater infrastructure, and provides opportunity for meaningful public engagement. Next slide, please. So the Clean Water Act and the United States Code can be found at the links that are up on your screens right now, and both links are also found on current EPA web pages. Next slide. So wrapping up, we have the opportunity to continue and improve upon the progress made over the past 50 years and to ensure water quality protections for our waters. Our way of life, clean water from the tap, a day spent floating on the river, fishing with our families, and protections from storms all depend on a strong Clean Water Act. Prioritizing equitable access to clean water and mitigating the impacts of climate change must be key factors in charting a course to ensure that the Clean Water Act remains an effective and reliable tool over the next 50 years. So here's to the next 50 years. Hopefully our path is a little less rocky than this photo, but we're definitely ready to get our feet wet. And with that, I will open it up for any comments or questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Lemon. That's a really good reminder of the important work that we do as a commission. So I appreciate this agenda item very much. Do I have any questions or comments from any of the other commissioners?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, Commissioner Thompson.
If you'll indulge me, I'd like to reminisce a little bit. I started working for the EPA in San Francisco in 1973, just a few months after passing of the Public Law 92-500. I was 5 years old at the time. And one of my most treasured publications, at least, is I've got an original paper copy of the actual act itself, Public Law 92-500, amendments to the Federal Public Health Act or something like that. I don't recall the exact title. And I have the gratification of looking back over this long period of time at the progress that the regulatory agencies and the industry has made. One of the first projects I worked on was I was overseeing the issuance, the writing and issuance of the NPDES permit for the Hyperion sewage treatment plant. We call them wastewater treatment plants or water purification plants now, but they used to be called sewage treatment plants. And the Hyperion plant was the biggest sewage treatment plant in Los Angeles. It took about half of the wastewater from the entire city. It provided settling of the solids. That's all the treatment that was provided. No disinfection, no removal of organics, simply settling of the sludge. And then it was piped to an ocean outfall 3 miles offshore. And frequently the beaches along the Los Angeles coastline had to close because depending on the winds and tides, you would have, floating debris wash up on the beaches. So the Hyperion treatment plant now is one of the best plants, one of the best large plants in the country. Again, it's very gratifying to see the progress we've made, and a lot of it is due to agencies such as yours and people such as Shelley. So congratulations to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. It sounds like you would be a great candidate for doing one of those interviews that Shelley is seeking for part of her outreach campaign.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? I can't see everybody's hand, so I can't tell if someone's raising their hand, but going through. Okay, I don't see any, but Ms. Lemon, I'd like to thank you again for your presentation. And again, it's such, we've come a long way. It's a good reminder that what we do at each and every one of these meetings is extremely important work, and it makes a real difference and is very impactful. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair,
Who's
I believe,
that? Oh,
I believe
Council
Commissioner
Sanchez.
Dominguez had his hand up.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
believe Commissioner.
Thank you, Council Sanchez. I apologize, Commissioner Dominguez. I did not see your hand up, but please proceed.
That's okay, Madam Chair. Not to eat up too much time, but I never pass up an opportunity to pose something to Ms. Lemon. So, Ms. Lemon, thank you for your presentation. I don't know if anybody else caught it, but I did notice how you subtly slipped in what looks like a new logo that you were maybe going to roll out of fishable, not flammable. So if you're going to put those on T-shirts, well, mark me down for one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
That phrase also caught my attention as well, Commissioner Dominguez. I really like it. And I always love, I don't love seeing the picture of the Cuyahoga River on fire, but it is just such a great visual to demonstrate where we started and where we are today. So it's nice that our rivers are not flaming these days. Although we, again, still have lots of work to do in various areas. So we'll keep doing that hard work. Okay, so now that I can see more people's names, I don't see any additional hands up, and I will once again thank Ms. Lemon for her presentation, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Okay, so next up we have Ms. Weatherly, Council Weatherly, again on an update on the Water Quality Management Plan and continuing planning process. Please proceed, Ms. Weatherly.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. And I want to apologize if my my PowerPoint and screen sharing skills are not advanced. So we'll see how I do with the next one. For agenda item number 7, I would like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Fulham, who is the Bureau's Standards Planning and Reporting Team Leader, and she will be presenting an update on the State Water Quality Management Plan and continuing planning process. And as many of you may recall, the Commission approved the last update to the State Water Quality Management Plan in September of 2020. The Clean Water Act requires that the plan and planning process be periodically reviewed and updated as needed to ensure the processes are current and adequately reflect the state's water quality management system. Any updates and revisions to the plan are approved by the Commission before submittal to EPA. In preparation for this presentation, the Bureau submitted a PDF of its PowerPoint presentation to the Commission in advance. Following the presentation, Ms. Fulham is available to answer any questions. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Fulham.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and the public. If you'll give me a minute, I will try and share. We'll see if this is any more successful. Okay.
It is up and available to see, at least for me.
Okay. Progress. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction, Crystal. As she mentioned, my name is Jennifer Fulham, and I am the Standards Planning and Reporting Team Leader for the Surface Water Quality Bureau. And I wanted to give you an update on the Water Quality Management Plan and continuing planning process. I should have, there we go. So what is the WQMP CPP and who does it apply to? It's essentially two separate documents. One is the Water Quality Management Plan and the other is the continuing planning process. New Mexico has combined those two documents into one state publication, and it consists of 9 plan elements. That's the WQMP portion. And that really describes how the state identifies and prioritizes point and non-point water quality problems, how we consider alternative solutions for water quality protection, and how we develop pollution control measures that are necessary to protect water quality. The other portion is 9 specific processes, and that's the CPP portion, and that's what New Mexico uses to implement its water quality management program. So this really results in a concise summary of the water quality management system for New Mexico, and it outlines the roles of the major participants who are involved in establishing water quality standards, those that protect designated uses, how we periodically assess water quality, and how we prioritize our point and non-point sources of pollution that could impact water quality. So altogether, the WQMP CPP demonstrates how the state upholds the requirements of the Federal Clean Water Act. And Shelley gave a really good summary of all the different portions of the Water Quality Act and the Clean Water Act that we uphold. And those elements are wrapped up into the WQMP CPP. So do we have to have a WQMP CPP? In short, yes. It's required under the Federal Clean Water Act. It's also required under federal regulations. So for the WQMP, that regulation is 40 CFR 130.6. And for the CPP, it's 40 CFR 130.5. It's also required under our New Mexico Water Quality Act. As Crystal gave a brief on, we update it periodically, and that's determined as needed, or if EPA determines that we need to update it. And essentially, NMED is the lead in updating it. more specifically the Surface Water Quality Bureau, because we cover more of the elements. But we also involve tribe stakeholders and the public at various stages during the updates to ensure that we're meeting all the needs and its functions. At the end, the WQCC has approval and adoption requirements. I may get this mixed up. The WQMP is the plan, and that is adopted by the commission, and the processes are approved by the commission. Those are then sent to EPA, and EPA reviews the processes and they approve the plan. So what's in it? The main document has 14 different sections, and then there's 3 appendices. The main document goes from everything from how we develop water quality standards to how we monitor our waters and assess them against those standards, how we develop total maximum daily loads, how we develop permit limits for municipal and industrial waste streams, how we manage non-point sources. There is a section on designated management agencies, which are those entities that have some authority for assisting with maintaining water quality protections. How we implement, that really talks about construction programs and how there's funding sources for building out our protections for water quality. We talk about the dredge and fill, basins, groundwater. This, you can kind of see that there's a relation to the Federal Clean Water Act and the stuff that Shelley was just presenting. We do have a special section for the protection of water quality standards for human health. And then finally, section 14 is kind of an important section for us because it outlines all the different processes that we undertake and the public participation requirements and where the state and federal regulations are that dictate that public participation. For the appendices, we have the implementation procedure for our anti-degradation policy specific to regulated activities. We also have our list of approved TMDLs for New Mexico, and we also have the methodology for our hydrology protocol. And that's a methodology that we use to determine the hydrologic regime of a water and support for designated use, for establishing designated uses. So you can find this document, like I said, it's a state publication, so it is filed with the New Mexico State Library. You can also get a copy from us in the Santa Fe offices, but if you need it anytime, whenever you want, it is on New Mexico Environment Department's Surface Water Quality Bureau's website. And there we have a brief little introduction as to what it is, where the regulations come from. It gives you the current WQMP CPP with all the appendices, and then it also provides you the links to some of the references that I mentioned. So what are we doing now? Right now, we're looking at updating the WQMP CPP. As Crystal mentioned, the last one was approved, it was either September or October of 2020. We've committed to looking at it more regularly because the one before that hadn't been updated since 2011. So right now we're looking at starting our update. Part of that includes a needs survey, which is to look at the current functionality of the WQMP CPP, and then compare it to our survey that we sent out during our last update. We want to see if we're increasing the functionality. Then we need to update processes, incorporate new processes, edit language to improve functionality based on our survey, and then, of course, correct any grammatical errors, and then update references. Now, all of this includes incorporating input from tribe stakeholders and the public. Some of the timelines we're looking at. At this point, we're going to be entering a needs assessment phase. We think that we can get that done over the next several months. At that point, we'll determine if an update is needed. If there is, then we would start working on drafting those updates. That'll take us a few months internally. And then once we get that out, we'll go into doing some tribal, stakeholder, and public outreach. We think that we can get that done throughout the summer of 2023. And then we would take that input, we'd revise the WQMP CPP accordingly and prepare a final draft for approval. That'll probably take us into mid to late fall of 2023. And then we would request approval and adoption from the WQCC during the winter. And then once we got that, we would submit it to EPA for review and approval. Then we would disseminate it out to the public. And we think that we could get the process completed probably around June of 2024, pending all things go smoothly. So I just want to thank you for your time, give you a little bit of an update of where we're at, what we're hoping to do over the next, 18 months or so, and then answer any questions you may have about it.
Thank you, Ms. Fulham. Do we have any questions from the commissioners? Okay, I don't see any. Ms. Fulham, if I may request that when you get to the point of completing the needs survey, it would be good, I think, for the commission to have an update to know whether or not you are proceeding with an update. So if you could inform the commission of the path forward at that point, I think it would be just good to know that it's being considered.
Madam Chair, we'd be glad to do that.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments from commissioners. So Ms. Fulham, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. It was very good to hear about the update on the Water Quality Management Plan and continuing planning process. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is number 8. This is an update on the non-point source management plan, also being presented by Council Weatherly. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to introduce Mr. Abe Franklin, the Bureau's Program Manager of the Watershed Protection Section. He will be presenting an update, as you said, on the 2024 Non-Point Source Management Program revision and will be available for questions following his presentation. Abe? Abe, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, commissioners, and members of the public. This is kind of an extension of Ms. Fulham's presentation. I also have a presentation to share. Let's see. Sorry for the delay. And I don't mean to be sharing this rainbow. How's that?
There we go. I can see it now.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. The non-point source management program is part of the water quality management plan. So this is kind of an extension of that. Ms. Fulham mentioned a couple of times that addressing non-point source pollution is part of the WQMP. The non-point source management plan is required by Clean Water Act Section 319 B1. And I've got a citation from the act there, which says that the governor of each state shall, after notice and opportunity for public comment, prepare and submit to the administrator a management program which such state proposes to implement in the first 4 fiscal years beginning after the date of submission of such management program for controlling pollution added from non-point sources to the navigable waters within the state and improving the quality of such waters. Now, I key in on the 4 fiscal years idea. Current EPA guidance requests that we revise the plan every 5 years. And our most recent plan was approved in 2019. So we're actually trying for approval in 2024. So this is just an early notification for the commission that we are beginning the process of revising the non-point source management plan. And here is the proposed timeline, at least the first part of it. The first bullet here, we have a draft memorandum of agreement with the Water Resources Research Institute for them to provide a early public input workshop, which will be a virtual workshop, probably in December, but 60 days after the date of approval of our agreement. Then we will, once we've collected some information from the public, we'll begin a drafting period, and we'll give EPA the opportunity for a technical review, and then conduct a public comment period that's planned for fall of 2023. And then after some additional revisions based on public comment, then we plan to provide it to the Water Quality Control Commission for review and approval, hopefully in early 2024. And then pending Water Quality Control Commission approval, we would then submit it to EPA, and EPA may approve by about June 2024. So it's kind of a long-term process, but we're at a good point in time to evaluate how the current plan is working. We've been carrying out the current plan pretty much as described in the document, which you can access. We have 3 key background documents. The first one is our current non-point source management plan. The next document is from EPA. It's a description of components of an effective non-point source management program, according to EPA. And then related to that is the third document on this list, which is non-point source program and grants guidelines, which is essentially how states can spend Section 319 grant funds. So those 3 together provide a good background on the process and kind of what our sideboards are. And that's actually it for my presentation. I kept it brief, and we can take questions now.
Thank you, Mr. Franklin. I will seek any questions or comments from any of the commissioners.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, Commissioner Thompson, please proceed.
Mr. Franklin, what I'm quite familiar with this document. I think it's a fine document. It's quite mature. I'm kind of curious, what anticipated changes do you think will be needed in the next version?
Well, we haven't gotten very far in deciding what the main changes will be, but we're pretty sure that this iteration will include information on increasing resilience to climate change and mitigating the impacts of climate change. The current plan has no reference to climate change at all. So that's a deficiency. And then another item has to do with social equity. And specifically, there was a federal executive order that included the Section 319 grant program called Justice 40 that we'll need to comply with. And at this point, EPA is still developing guidance and instructions for how to comply with Justice 40. But the timing is about right. We're expecting to have better information on and guidance on how to do that during this revision process. Other than that, we have a want list of pretty relatively superficial changes having to do with clarity, some potential terminology changes to improve readability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I don't see any, but I appreciate, Mr. Franklin, your response to Commissioner Thompson's question. Given that the commission recently revised its water quality standards, I'm glad to hear that the non-point source plan will align with the changes that we implemented during that proceeding.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Franklin, for your presentation. And that concludes item number 8 on our agenda. Moving into number 9, Council Weatherly's last agenda item for today. It is, again, as we mentioned earlier, it's the NMED Surface Water Quality Bureau's petition for approval of the TMDL for the Upper Rio Grande watershed and discussion on the request for hearing. Ms. Weatherly, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. For agenda item 9, the Bureau, the Surface Water Quality Bureau, has come before you to request approval of the final total maximum daily load, or TMDL, for the Upper Rio Grande watershed. And you will recall that the Bureau appeared before the commission at its August meeting requesting a hearing, which the commission granted. And I understand from earlier discussions today that you know, the agenda item does not list a hearing. But at the August meeting, Commissioner Brankard made an inquiry regarding public notice for the TMDL in relation to the November 2019 New Mexico Court of Appeals Memorandum Opinion in Rio Hondo Land and Cattle Company, LP, and Wild Earth Guardians versus New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission and New Mexico Environment Department, in the matter of the final total maximum daily load for the Rio Ruidoso, which was approved by the commission on November 15th, 2016. I would like to take some time now to address Commissioner Brankard's question. And with that, after the August WQCC meeting, I reviewed the Rio Hondo opinion as well as the related 2021 10th Circuit opinion in Rio Hondo Land and Cattle Company versus EPA. In that case, in that federal 10th Circuit case, Rio Hondo appealed EPA's approval of the MPDES permit related to the Rio Ruidoso TMDL. And then I took Commissioner Brankard's question to the Bureau and asked, you know, how is it that, you know, if a TMDL is a regulation, that the commission could have approved, you know, 420 TMDL since 1999, and 16 of those since the November 2019 decision without going through the regulatory process for rulemaking. And through our discussions and inquiries with EPA, the answer that we came up with is that the commission and the Bureau have gotten it right for 23 years. The TMDLs are not regulations. They are planning documents. And so at this point, you've probably already guessed that I'm here to explain the Bureau's position that TMDLs are not regulations and offer some options to the commissions for moving forward in light of the 2019 Court of Appeals opinion. And what I'd like to do is offer a brief overview of that Court of Appeals ruling, some reasonings for why a TMDL should not be considered a regulation despite that ruling, and how a TMDL as a regulation or a rulemaking might look in our regulatory process, and how some other states are addressing TMDLs, and then offer some options for moving forward in light of all that information. And if that is sounds appropriate to the commission, I'll move forward with my argument. Okay.
Please proceed. I don't see any hands up for comment at this point, so I think
Okay.
we all want to hear your explanation.
Okay, thank you. So regarding the Court of Appeals ruling and the positions of the department, in summary, in the Rio Hondo case, the petitioners appealed the WQCC's November 15th, 2016 order that adopted the TMDL for a segment of the Rio Ruidoso, and NMED intervened. The Court of Appeals affirmed the WQCC decision, but in doing so, it held that a TMDL is a regulation for the purposes of subject matter jurisdiction, or in other words, so that the court could consider the petitioner's appeal. In determining that a TMDL is a regulation, the court looked at the definitions of rule and regulation under the WQCC adjudicatory procedures, the WQCC rulemaking procedures, the State Rules Act, and New Mexico Supreme Court case law. The court determined that the TMDL is a regulation because it implements the Water Quality Act and that the TMDL affects persons and entities who are regulated by the WQCC and NMED. While NMED agreed that a regulation is an appealable commission action under the State Water Quality Act, it took the position that a TMDL is not a regulation and the court did not have subject matter jurisdiction. NMED looked at the same regulatory definitions and the same New Mexico Supreme Court case as the Court of Appeals, but it determined that a TMDL does not fall with any of those definitions because TMDLs are informational tools. NMED pointed to the Federal Clean Water Act definition of a TMDL as well as EPA guidance and argued that it does not rise to the level of a regulation. NMED also noted that the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit had clarified that TMDLs are not in and of themselves regulations. The definitions that the court and both the court and NMED looked at for the WQCC adjudicatory procedures state that regulations mean any rules or standards promulgated by the Commission to implement the Water Quality Act. The WQCC rulemaking procedures state that a regulation means any rule, regulation, or standard promulgated by the Commission and affecting one or more persons besides the Commission and the Department. And the State Rules Act defines a rule as meaning any rule, regulation, or standard. including those that explicitly or implicitly implement or interpret a federal or state legal mandate or other applicable law and amendments thereto or repeals and renewals thereof, issued and promulgated by any agency and purporting to affect one or more agencies besides the agency issuing the rule, or to affect members or persons not members or employees of the issuing agency. And the Supreme Court, in the case cited by both NMED and the Commission, looked at the State Rules Act definition of what a rule is, and which is what I just read. And so all three of these definitions are very similar in that they define a rule or a regulation as a rule or a regulation or a standard. In the Court of Appeals case, the WQCC filed a concurrence with NMED's position, stating that quote, the Commission agrees with the positions taken and the authorities cited by NMED and joins in NMED's request that the court affirm the Commission's approval of the Rio Ruidoso TMDL document proposed by NMED, or in the alternative, dismiss the appeal due to lack of subject matter jurisdiction. And since that Court of Appeals decision, I just wanted to point out that the Commission has approved 16 TMDLs without implementing procedural rules for rulemaking. And in 2020, the Commission requested that regulations be drafted for miscellaneous approval procedures. At the November 10th, 2020 WQCC meeting, Chair Pruitt requested that potential paths forward be developed for miscellaneous matters that come before the WQCC, including TMDLs, the statewide water quality management plan and continuing planning process, the State of New Mexico integrated report and list, and the New Mexico non-point source management plan. These are all planning documents prepared under the Clean Water Act and are approved by the WQCC before submitting to EPA for final approval and approval under the Clean Water Act. At the time, the Commission stated that it was concerned that the miscellaneous items do not fit easily or readily into WQCC procedures, including rulemaking or adjudicatory matters. Now, the 10th Circuit case, I'd like to briefly summarize. In 2021, Rio Hondo Land and Cattle Company appealed EPA's approval of the NPDES permit that was related to the Rio Ruidoso TMDL. The 10th Circuit denied Rio Hondo's petition because, among other reasons, the challenge to the permit, the court stated that it boiled down to a challenge of the underlying TMDL. The 10th Circuit noted that states submit finalized TMDLs to EPA for approval, and that either water quality standards nor TMDLs are, or I should say neither water quality standards nor TMDLs are self-executing, and they have no regulatory force on their own. TMDLs and water quality standards are used by EPA permit writers in the NPDES process to create allowable discharge levels, which are enforceable limits on the amount of discharge. The final NPDES permit must be consistent with the assumptions and requirements of the applicable TMDL pursuant to the Federal Clean Water Act. Requiring that permit levels are consistent with the assumptions and requirements of any available waste load allocation for the discharge prepared by the state. The Bureau's and New Mexico Environment Department's position is that a TMDL is not a regulation. because it's not a standard and it's not promulgated by the Commission to implement the Water Quality Act. It's under the first point in that it's not a standard is that it's a water quality planning document that establishes specific goals to meet surface water quality standards. It can be updated in response to changed conditions, new data, or revised standards. Under our NMAC, water quality standards consist of the designated use or uses of surface waters of the state, the water quality criteria necessary to protect the use or uses, and an anti-degradation policy. And it's not promulgated by the Commission to implement the Water Quality Act because it's developed by NMED pursuant to Section 303D of the Federal Clean Water Act as a requirement, under the requirement that all states identify water bodies that do not meet state standards and develop TMDLs for them. It's then approved and used by EPA as guidance in its development of NPDES permits. They're informational tools, and their function is to, help assist EPA with the development of the NPDES permit. And the Clean Water Act requires those permits to be consistent with a TMDL, but that doesn't dictate any specific action and still provides for federal discretion in that a TMDL is not enforceable on its own. However, an NPDES or NPDES permit, which takes into consideration a TMDL, is enforceable. So I want to switch to talk a little bit about impacts of the TMDL as a regulation, because one question that keeps surfacing in my discussions with the Bureau is, whether all of the 480 previously approved TMDLs would also need to go through a rulemaking process. EPA views TMDLs as planning documents, but in our discussions with EPA, both the Bureau's and mine, EPA would work with the states if they incorporated them into their regulations. Although the WQCC approves a TMDL, it's not a final agency action on the part of the state. EPA must approve the final TMDL before it can even be incorporated into the statewide water quality management plan and continuing planning process. If EPA does not approve the TMDL submitted by the state, then EPA is required to draft its own TMDL for the water body and incorporate that into any related NPDES or NPDES permits. EPA administers all federal NPDES permits for the state. New Mexico does not have primacy for issuing those permits. The department reviews the permits for compliance with the Clean Water Act and state water quality standards, and the Secretary of NMED certifies the permits under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. Currently, a TMDL can be challenged once it's incorporated into an NPDES permit. If it's a regulation, then it could be challenged immediately, including for point and non-point sources. So current opportunities to appeal a TMDL would be through a federal appeal of the NPDES permit, or our regulations allow for an appeal of an NPDES permit certification to the Secretary, which could then be appealed to the WQCC, which can then be appealed to the Court of Appeals. So it's a longer process. It's not the TMDL directly. It would be elements of the TMDL that are incorporated into an NPDES permit, and it would be the certification of the state, or that the state certification of that permit, which is what would be appealed. Currently, the TMDL development procedures and rulemaking, or excuse me, the current TMDL development procedures are outlined in Section 4 of the State Water Quality Management Plan, as required by the Clean Water Act, and includes the following items once a TMDL is drafted. Once the TMDL is drafted, the Bureau, the Surface Water Quality Bureau, solicits comments from NMED staff and EPA staff. They conduct public participation in accordance with Section 14 of the Water Quality Management Plan and continuing planning process. Public notice and public comment period of at least 30 days. Then the Bureau responds to those comments and makes appropriate changes to the draft TMDL based on those public comments. They add the response to comments as an appendix to the draft TMDL, and they provide that to stakeholders who have submitted those comments. They post the final draft TMDL on NMED's website no less than 10 days prior to a WQCC meeting. They present the final draft TMDL to the WQCC and request approval. They then incorporate any WQCC comments into the final TMDL as necessary, and they adopt the adoption of the TMDL by the WQCC as an amendment to Appendix B of the Water Quality Management Plan. And continuing planning process. They then submit the final TMDL to EPA Region 6 for approval. They then post the approved TMDL and all corresponding documents on NMED's website and update the administrative record. They update Appendix B of the Water Quality Management Plan and include the approved TMDL. And then TMDLs can be revised or removed following the process that I just outlined. A rulemaking procedure would add about 6 months to a year to the process and will add the following items. Pre-hearing procedures that would allow any person to file a petition with the Commission to adopt, amend, or repeal any regulation, including a TMDL, within the jurisdiction of the Commission. It would, for notice of the rulemaking and hearing, it would require a publication in at least one newspaper, publication in the State Register, a post on the Sunshine Portal. It would need to be made available in the department's district, field, and regional offices. It would be sent by email to persons on the interested parties list or by mail if that's how they requested that. It would need to be provided to the New Mexico Legislative Council for distribution to appropriate interim and standing legislative committees. For the hearing, would require the filing of technical testimony, entry of appearances, transcripts paid for by the commissioner, usually the Surface Water Quality Bureau, post-hearing submissions, hearing officer's report, written commission decision within 60 days of the close of the record or the hearing officer's report, and a final rule filed with state records 15 days after the adoption. Appeal to the Court of Appeals would be allowed within 30 days of the commission's decision, and it would be published in the New Mexico Register within 90 days after adoption. The differences in public participation would be So EPA's regulations require public involvement in developing TMDLs. However, the level of public involvement varies by state. So for current public participation requirements, we have a minimum of a 30-day public comment period. We conduct public meetings in affected watersheds, publish notice of public comment period and meetings in a newspaper or alternative media. We email the Surface Water Quality Bureau mailing list. We post on NMED's website. We present the updates and revisions to the WQCC, and we post the WQCC and EPA approval on the NMED website. A rulemaking would add a public involvement plan, an opportunity for any person to file a petition with the Commission to adopt, amend, or repeal the TMDL, additional public notice requirements, extended public comment period, and public participation in the hearing would be more formal, but wouldn't add additional participation opportunities. So that was a lot. I do want to take some time to go over some other states, how they handle TMDLs. For Region 6 states, which include Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, for none of them incorporated TMDL into their regulations. Texas does bring them before the Commission, but no rulemaking. Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana do not take them before a commission, and they do not do a rulemaking. Arizona, our neighboring state, does not take them before a commission, and they do not do a rulemaking. And although this seems far off, I do want to talk a little bit about Ohio, because Ohio has experienced a similar situation. In March of 2015, the Supreme Court of Ohio determined that a TMDL established by Ohio EPA pursuant to the Clean Water Act is a rule that is subject to the requirements of the Ohio Administrative Procedures Act. Ohio EPA, in their ruling, they stated that Ohio EPA must follow the rulemaking procedures in the Ohio Administrative Procedure Act before submitting a TMDL to EPA for its approval and before the TMDL can be implemented into an NPDES permit. That was in, March of 2015. Subsequently, Ohio EPA collaborated with stakeholders and the Ohio General Assembly, which is their state legislature, to pass legislation exempting TMDLs from the state rulemaking procedure. The statute was revised and included the following. It reinstated any previously approved TMDLs. It required stakeholder outreach at several points in the project. It mandated consideration of several technical and financial items. It affirmed that TMDLs are not actions of the director and challenges are made through the NPDES permit appeal process. And it required Ohio EPA to adopt administrative rules for stakeholder notification and significant public interest. And all of that information came from Ohio's 2022 Integrated Water Quality Monitoring and Assessment Report. And I am getting close. So, so that brings me to some solution options for moving forward in light of all this information and the Court of Appeals opinion. You know, at the core, this is all really about identifying and restoring impaired waters. And based on the Commission's concurrence in the Rio Hondo appeal and its subsequent approval of TMDLs without implementing a rulemaking procedure, and the 2020 request from the Commission that regulations be drafted for miscellaneous approval procedures. It seems that the commission might agree with the Bureau, with the department, that TMDLs are not, nor have they ever been, regulations. And weighing all of this information, the Bureau offers the following suggestions for a path forward. The Bureau requests that the Commission hold a TMDL hearing for the Upper Rio Grande watershed and deliberate on that. And the Bureau requests that the Commission promulgate regulations for miscellaneous approval items, which would move forward with the regulations for those four items, including TMDLs. And it would clarify that the regulations that TMDLs do not fit into existing rulemaking or adjudicatory procedures because they are not a regulation. Alternatively, the Commission could issue an order requiring a rulemaking or denying the TMDL and requiring a rulemaking. And with that, NMED could have the option to appeal that to the Court of Appeals. And that really ends my very long explanation for why the Bureau and the department do not consider or do not view TMDLs as regulations. NMED requests that the WQCC hear the Upper Rio Grande TMDL presentation and hold a hearing on that matter. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weatherly, for that very thorough and comprehensive explanation of your position on this matter. You know, I think it's a challenge to be able to hear the issue today, as we've already stated. So I think the action before us is sort of putting closure to how the WQCC will handle these matters moving forward in light of your proposal to either adopt those rulemakings or proceed with our regular process. I would like at this time to open this up for discussion and comments from other commissioners to see their reactions or thoughts on what you just presented to us. Any comments? Commissioner Brenkard?
Okay, since I started this discussion, I think Ms. Weatherly made a great argument about why TMDLs should not be considered rules. And what we're talking about here are procedural requirements. Okay, this has nothing to do with changing the nature of TMDLs. It's just what procedure do you put in place to approve them. Unfortunately, a version of Ms. Weatherly's argument was presented to the New Mexico Court of Appeals, and they just flat out rejected it and said that TMDLs are rules under the New Mexico State Rules Act, which means you have to follow that set of procedures in order for the commission, which is a party to that appeal, in order for them to approve a TMDL. And I just don't see any way around getting around a Court of Appeals decision. You know, we're the executive branch of government, and the legislature enacts the laws, the judiciary interprets them, and we implement them. So as much as I may agree with Ms. Weatherly's analysis and the department's position in the litigation, that's not the way the court came out. And the department did not appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court, which it could have. I do think that the idea, and this is obviously a big step for the department, what Ohio did is probably a decent solution. Right now, if you look at the Water Quality Act, we have one sentence in the entire Water Quality Act that deals with all the things that the department has been talking about today, all the various parts of the Water Quality Management Plan. The act simply says, the commission shall adopt a comprehensive water quality management plan and develop continual planning process. That's it. Okay? Doesn't say anything about public participation, say how we do it, nothing. Okay? So this might be an opportunity for the department to come up with a more robust provision in the Water Quality Act about how we, both the commission and the department, implements all of the responsibilities we have under the Clean Water Act. And so, and I don't, you could put something in there that say that all these actions under this planning process are not rulemakings. And I think that would trump the Court of Appeals decision. But right now, I think we're stuck with the Court of Appeals decision. I don't think it's that big of a deal. The reality is you have all these hearings year after year on TMDLs and nobody shows up to complain about them. So the notion that we're going to be stuck in court on dealing with these cases is it seems difficult to imagine. Plus you have this same case which basically said that yes, you can appeal a TMDL to the courts. Okay, so we already have that in the court ruling. I mean, that was the subject matter jurisdiction. It says, yes, you can appeal a TMDL. Okay. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, we can work with the department on how to put the wording in the administrative code. I don't think you have to put the entire TMDL document in the administrative code. You can just reference the website and say, that's where, go find it there. And I don't think also that we need to go and revisit all of the prior approvals. I think this is a going forward decision by the court, and it will affect our approvals of TMDLs going forward. So anyway, that's enough for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Brancard. Commissioner Dominguez. Commissioner Dominguez, you're muted.
That might have been the best part if I remained that way, but I felt obligated to add something to this, since much like many other issues, I was around for the Rio Hondo appeal, and in fact, my name appears on many of the court documents as it went through the Court of Appeals. So let me start with the Court of Appeals process, because NMED took some of the lead on that case. Although there was WQCC concurrence, some of that had to deal with counsel for the commission at the time or so forth, but I was involved with some of the discussion as that went through the Court of Appeals. And both NMED and WQCC never agreed with the fact of the court having subject matter jurisdiction. Both parties just didn't see it as being a rule or regulation. However, the Court of Appeals upheld the commission's decision on Rio Hondo, and I don't think either the department or the commission was going to fall on the sword to argue the subject matter jurisdiction, because in essence, the commission's decision was upheld by the Court of Appeals. Just the process of it being upheld, both parties kind of disagreed with. So that being said, it was probably part of the reason that, as Commissioner Brankert alluded to, that NMED or the commission didn't appeal the Court of Appeals decision to the Supreme Court was because the commission's decision had been upheld. It would have been a little bit of falling on the sword to argue the subject matter jurisdiction because we had already won at the Court of Appeals decision. So with that said, I think the Court of Appeals interpretation of the State Rules Act is very broad, and it would loop in many guidance documents, any planning documents, not just for Environment Department, but every other state agency that has similar type documents. It would pull all of those into the rulemaking process. And I don't think that's what the intention of the State Rules Act was. It becomes even more complicated with some of the ones that come before the commission that are approved by the commission, but that's not the final approval. They actually have to go to EPA for final approval. So for the commission to handle them as a rulemaking and then send a rule to EPA that they could overturn for whatever reason would really complicate the whole rulemaking process. I just don't see that as being a plausible solution there. Even with what my fellow commissioner has previously said of the Court of Appeals decision. I think there has to be looked at another path forward. Whether that is something put into the Water Quality Act, where it provides some type of an indication that items such as planning documents or guidance documents do not fall under the jurisdiction of the State Rules Act. I think one of the key things to keep in mind here is for any rulemaking, one of the general purposes of rulemaking is so that the public has an opportunity to participate and have input. Well, if you look at any of the TMDL process, there's extensive public participation from the get-go. Even before it gets to the commission, there's public participation, and then there's a public participation process once it reaches the commission. We hold a hearing on it where the public still has an opportunity to participate. So I think it kind of covers the issue of, is there an opportunity for the public to be involved? That's a given. I think it comes down to the splitting of the hairs of the Court of Appeals decision, looking at the State Rules Act very broadly. And I don't think you could find a state agency in this state that would agree with that same interpretation. I know as Department of Ag, we would not view that in the same manner. we have guidance documents or protocols or procedures that would somehow get sucked into a rulemaking if we all fall in line with the court's opinion on the appeal of Rio Hondo. And then lastly, let me follow up on part of what Chair Pruitt's discussion was regarding TMDLs. TMDLs historically would just show up on the agenda as an action item for the commission on any given month. There was no prior notice. The department would just get it placed on the agenda, and the commission would handle it at said meeting. Chair Pruitt thought some form of advance notice prior to it showing up on the agenda was a more prudent process. And that was part of the discussion when Chair Pruitt had previously brought that up. It was not from an aspect of rulemaking, but of some type of prior notice to the commission that a TMDL was going to be brought forward, not to make it more of a rigid formal process, but just so that the commission could be better prepared ahead of time. I had one-on-one conversations with Chair Pruitt when all that was going on. That is my best recollection of that. And that was more of where the system that's currently in place of the department coming to the commission, requesting a hearing, and then it being placed on the agenda in the coming months. I don't think there was ever a intent, although I don't know what some of the internal discussions within the department were, to make anything a very rigorous, formal rulemaking process. It was just more of how to bring any of these items, such as TMDLs or planning documents, such as the WQ Water Quality Management Plan or Non-Point Source Management Plan, of a formal process, or advance notice to bring those before the commission. That was the substance, as I remember Chair Pruitt's discussion previously. So I know my discussion was not as well organized as Council Weatherly's argument was, but I felt compelled to give some historical perspective there. I personally do not believe that TMDLs fit into the category of fitting into rulemaking. I think it becomes overly complicated given the fact that things have to then move to EPA for a final approval. I don't see that even fits into the formula of the State Rules Act. So with that, I will give up the floor, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. I agree with your last statement there. I know Council Sanchez had his hand up, and then Commissioner Thompson also raised his hand. So before we go to Council Sanchez to hear his comments, and I know we're pending his analysis based on our discussion of the minutes earlier on this issue, I I also just historically, my recollection of how these were previously presented were they were requested for approval by the commission and not request for a hearing. And I feel like the use of the word hearing in these matters has further muddied the water and the procedural aspects of how we have adopted previous TMDLs. So I will just wanted to note that and turn it over to Council Sanchez and then Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the commission, just to also offer a historical perspective for those commissioners that were not sitting commissioners when Chair Pruitt was chair. Basically, the commission has two sets of rules, one set for adjudicatory proceedings and one set for rulemaking proceedings. What was happening, and I think Commissioner Dominguez will concur in this, that there was a number of miscellaneous matters that were coming before the commission that didn't fall either within the rule on adjudicatory proceedings or the rule on rulemaking proceedings. Chair Pruitt was a big proponent of public notice and public participation. So her effort to have the commission develop rules to handle those miscellaneous matters was born out of that concern for public participation and public notice, or public notice and public participation. Let me more specifically, the commission was given copies, or rather Chair Stringer forwarded to the commission copies of the Court of Appeals opinion, and it may be cumbersome for the commissioners to refer to that opinion now, but if they will, it is page 2 of the Court of Appeals opinion. And the Court of Appeals opinion, when it publishes its slip opinions, assigns paragraphs, and it would be paragraph 2, lines 12 through 21 at page 2 of the Court of Appeals opinion. And I offer that because it gives a very succinct and direct background on what a TMDL is, which we really haven't talked about. I can wait a minute or just a little bit if commissioners want to access that Court of Appeals opinion, and then I can go forward and actually read from it. And let me go ahead and start reading what the Court of Appeals opinion, what the Court of Appeals wrote about a TMDL. A TMDL is a document that includes, in part, calculations of the maximum amount of pollutants that a water body can receive while maintaining state water quality standards. In everyday parlance, it's how much pollution can basically be dumped into a water body. And they cite the United States Code and the relevant CFR. Standards consist of water designated use and the water quality criteria necessary to protect those uses. I'll omit all the citations. The New Mexico Environment Department prepares TMDLs for water that fails to meet the department's water quality criteria. The department submits TMDLs for approval by the Water Quality Control Commission and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And then they go on, much of which covers what's already been discussed. And I want to point out that the Court of Appeals didn't only focus on the State Rules Act, but it actually focused on Water Quality Control Commission regulations. And the one that we haven't talked about and that pertains here is the definition of regulation under the Water Quality Control Commission's own rulemaking regulations. It is 20.1.6.7 subsection R. And it defines regulation as any rule, regulation, or standard promulgated by the commission. And this is, I think, the operative part, and affecting one or more persons besides the commission and the department. And then it goes on to give an exception. So basically, I think what the Court of Appeals was saying, how much toxicity is allowed in a water body certainly affects persons other than the commission and the department. And then if we look at the corresponding rule, if you will, under the State Rules Act, bear with me while I get my computer to do this. You'll find as I read it that it almost mimics the definition that the commission has adopted for regulation. I'm just waiting a moment here while my computer pulls that up. Under 14-4-2 subsection F of the State Rules Act, it defines rule as any rule, regulation, or standard. You'll begin to notice how similar the two are, including those explicitly or implicitly implemented or interpreting a federal state legal mandate. And then it goes on and it basically says again, purporting to affect one or more agency besides the agency issuing the rule, or to affect persons not members or employees of the issuing agency. Again, I think that was the focus of I don't think it was the focus of the Court of Appeals opinion, because if one goes and looks beyond at the Court of Appeals has a discussion and then begins to basically say that if you go to page 6, paragraph 7, they very specifically say the TMDL affects persons and entities who are regulated by the Water Quality Control Commission and the department. So I just wanted to offer perhaps a more focused or more succinct look at what a TMDL does and what the Court of Appeals decided. And again, we have to remember that this is legal precedent. It's what other circuits have done, what other jurisdictions have done is not controlling. What is controlling is a Court of Appeals opinion that was not appealed, and it stands as legal precedent. So I think it's, as Commissioner Branchard said, it's what pertains to us going forward, the commission going forward, not what is done previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Sanchez. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to follow up on a comment that Commissioner Brancard made. And he stated that the Water Quality Act has only one sentence that addresses water quality management plans and such. And my question is, and this, I'm not sure if this is for Ms. Weatherly or for our council, and that is, if the Water Quality Act specifically stated that planning documents do not have status as rulemaking ideas, would that eliminate the requirement that we consider the water quality management plan, TMDLs and CPP and stuff like that? Would that eliminate that requirement that they be considered as rulemaking subject to the appeals court's decision? I didn't phrase that very well, but I'm wondering if modification of the Water Quality Act that specifically called out these planning documents as planning documents rather than rulemaking documents, if that would address the problem.
I saw Council Sanchez pop on his video, but then he left. So I'm not sure if he had a comment. Commissioner Brancard, do you have a comment on that one?
Yes, a specific provision in the Water Quality Act would trump the more general provision in the State Rules Act. So yes, I think clearly we could carve out an exception in the Water Quality Act if that was amended. I'd also like to address a concern that's been raised about EPA approval of these documents. That's something that actually occurs for some of the rules that the commission already adopts. So for all of those underground injection control rules, 20.6.2.5 thousand, all of those have to go to EPA for approval. In fact, we just went through an excruciating process where the commission approved amendments in 2015, and they were finally approved by EPA in January of this year. So those rules were effectively in limbo for that entire period. So that's, again, having rules approved by the EPA is not unique.
Thank you, Commissioner Brancard. Appreciate your legal background for some of these questions too. Okay, so I think the action upon us for today is to consider more the procedural process of this particular TMDL. So we can't make a decision to approve the TMDL or not, but we were considering the request for that hearing at today's meeting. So I think we need to consider a motion to proceed with further discussion on the procedural aspects of adopting TMDLs, or consider a motion to proceed with our current existing process to hear a presentation and request for approval of the TMDL at the next meeting. Council Sanchez, would you agree or have any other considerations for the action that the commission needs to take today?
No, Madam Chair, I think you've fairly characterized it. It's either the commission decides to hear the petition as filed at the next meeting, or it decides that, consistent with the Court of Appeals opinion, TMDLs constitute rulemaking, and I don't know if they can direct the NMED, or at least suggest to NMED that they proceed in filing a petition that is consistent with TMDLs constituting rulemaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Commissioners, do I have a motion or further discussion on these options? Commissioner Brancard?
All right, I'll try to give it a try. I move that the commission request that the Environment Department submit a petition under the commission's rulemaking procedures for the commission to approve the TMDLs that were proposed under case 22-33.
Commissioner Cipher?
Yes, I would second that motion.
So just to make sure I heard that correctly, Commissioner Brancard, your motion is to proceed as a rulemaking? Is that correct?
Yes, that would be the process for the Environment Department to get approval from the commission of the TMDLs.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion with a second. Commissioner Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we're in the discussion phase here, so let me kind of see if there's, although it's not part of the motion, some of the previous discussion was talking about a path forward. So is Commissioner Brancard's motion setting what will be the future path for all TMDLs? Or is the commission going to take this process twofold, an interim process versus a long-term path? That's more of a question than it is a discussion. I'm just trying to wrap my head around where the commission's headed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. You know, I share your, I don't know if concern is the right word, but desire to sort of clarify. I think indirectly, if we were to pass this motion, we would be setting the stage for how we would procedurally move forward on all future TMDLs. Because we're, you know, taking this action on one TMDL. So yeah, that concerns me that we're doing this with an active TMDL rather than making a clear decision as a commission on how we want to establish the procedures. Vice Chair Cipher, do you have further discussion?
Yes, I just wanted to say why I seconded the motion. It was my feeling after listening to everybody and most recently Council Sanchez options that he was talking about, that would indeed answer one of the very questions that Commissioner Dominguez has brought up. The fact that we would know whether or not which direction to take as far as a long-term or a short-term, what we wanted to do in the future after listening to the petition and letting them make a more clear case. That was kind of my thought. That's what I was hopeful in getting resolved.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cipher. Yeah, I guess I would interpret the motion to be a little more conclusive than having additional discussion on the matter, because we would be proceeding with the specific TMDL being considered as a rulemaking. So I would, I guess, prefer to enter a motion that we would do it stepwise and make a final decision as a commission on the procedure for adopting TMDLs and how these would be considered, and then proceed accordingly. That's not a formal motion at this point. I think we have to consider each motion individually. But those are my thoughts on the motion that we have on the table at this moment. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Brancard?
Madam Chair, would you like me to withdraw the motion? I have no problem with that.
I would prefer a different motion, I think. So yes, I would like that.
Okay, thank you. I will withdraw my motion.
Thank you. And I would like to present, see if I can word this carefully and thoughtfully on the fly, a motion for the commission to make a determination on how TMDLs will be adopted moving forward at the next meeting of the commission. And do it in a more stepwise fashion. Any discussion or a second?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Cipher. I would second that. That was my original intent. So I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Cipher. And further discussion, Council Sanchez?
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification with respect to the department's pending petition. As I understand the motion on the floor, it's to have essentially a more formalized discussion on how the commission will, with respect to that pending petition and all others filed moving forward, how the commission will handle them. Are we then going to ask the department to hold in abeyance, or is the commission going to hold in abeyance the pending petition, subject to that more formal discussion and determination?
Yes, that is what I'm trying to capture, of how we would make the determination first on how to proceed with the request that's in front of us. So if I need to clarify that piece of it, I can do so in my motion and enter a modified motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I see Ms. Weatherly. Do you have a further comment for discussion?
No, Madam Chair, actually, Council Sanchez just clarified that. I would like to say if needed, the department could withdraw the request and re-request after the commission deliberates on the next best path, the best path forward for the rulemaking issue.
Thank you. I'll seek Council Sanchez's guidance on this motion, but I would like to revise the motion to state that I would like to move that the commission consider the procedures for the path forward on adopting TMDLs at the next commission meeting in order to inform how to address the current request to adopt the Upper Rio Grande TMDL. So I don't know if that in essence does what you're suggesting, Council Weatherly, to kind of postpone that decision and eliminates the need for withdrawal and covers everything that we need to cover. So Council Sanchez, if you'll clarify that motion is sufficient.
Madam Chair, I think the motion is sufficient. And I understood Council Weatherly to say that pending, if the implicit, I think in what she said is that if the commission were to decide at the next commission meeting that TMDLs have to be adopted through the rulemaking process, she would be willing to withdraw the pending petition and submit something that would be aligned with or consistent with the decision of the commission.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could clarify what I was saying earlier.
Yes, please, Council.
What I meant was that I think that your motion captured it, but what I meant was that if needed today, the department could withdraw its request for today and re-request at the next meeting. Not that we would, I'm not preliminarily saying that the department would agree with or necessarily follow the, if the commission decides that the TMDL is a regulation, I want to reserve the department's option to appeal that decision. So I don't want to make a statement as to how they would move forward at this time. If that clarifies that.
I think it does. I think the cleanest path would probably be for you to withdraw the request until we can, as a commission, can make a decision on the procedures for adopting TMDLs. But that being said, I think the motion still stands as proposed. So we have a motion and a second. Last call for additional discussion. Seeing none, Pam, may we have a roll call vote on the motion to consider TMDL adoption procedures at the next WQCC meeting in order to inform how to proceed with the Upper Rio Grande TMDL?
Yes. Commissioner Brankert, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams,
Yes.
Commissioner Patton,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil,
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik,
Yes.
and Chair Stringer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you all. I know we've been going for about 2.5 hours, so I'd like to propose that we take a 10-minute break before we enter into the next agenda item and reconvene, maybe an 8-minute break at 11:40 to give people a chance to take a break. Council Weatherly, I see your hand up, so before we go to break, I'll hear your comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask if the commission would like to receive a briefing from the department on this matter.
During the next
Before the next meeting, a written brief.
written brief. Well, I'll open that up to other commissioners for consideration. I think your presentation was a really succinct explanation, but having some of that articulated in writing could be very helpful to feed into our next meeting. So I personally think that that would be very helpful brief to inform the discussion at the next meeting. I don't know if we have to actually consider a motion on that or not, if that's something we can just ask for. Council Sanchez, do we need to take a roll call vote on that? No? Okay, good. So Council Weatherly, I appreciate that offer, and I think I'd like to accept it on behalf of the commission so that we have that going into the next meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your time today.
Thank you, Council Weatherly. I guess we do need to formally close out that agenda item, and now we will pause for a break and reconvene at about 11:40.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And Pam, that we can pause until 11:40. Convene.
Commission. Did you hear that, Pam? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I got some, it sounded like a call was coming in on my computer when I turned my microphone back on. Okay, so we're convened. Okay, thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda for today is the Water Quality Control Commission case 22-42, City of Gallup's petition for permit review, notice of appeal of permit renewal DP 1342, and motion for stay and remand. And for that, we have Chris Atencio and Nan Winter, Keith Herman, counsel for City of Gallup. Chris Atencio for NMED, sorry. Counsel Atencio, you are up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I believe since this is a petition by the city and the department is responding, it might be more appropriate for the city to proceed first with this petition.
Thank you. That makes sense. I went with you because you were listed first on the agenda, so I apologize for not thinking that went through. But it looks like we have Mr. Herman from the city. You may proceed.
Yes, good morning, Commissioner. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great, thank you. Just wanted to check. And I wasn't sure, this is my first time appearing before the Water Quality Control Commission. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to get too much into the merits of the petition or just start with the background and move forward from there.
Just a summary of why you're bringing the request for review would be sufficient.
Thank you very much. So this matter arose from the August 11th reissuance of DP 1342. The permit has been maintained by the city since 1992, and it regulates the potential groundwater impacts from discharges from the city's wastewater treatment plant. It's a key distinction here that surface discharges to the Puerco River are regulated by the EPA, and this is simply to monitor groundwater impacts. The city timely filed this verified petition for 4 items. It included a motion to stay 3 different permit conditions that were objected to by the city. We requested an appeal to be considered by the Water Quality Control Commission. And then we also requested that this proceeding be remanded back to the Environment Department under the permit review proceedings. For brevity, I will first address the objected permit conditions and our motion for stay. And afterwards, I will then address the appeal and permit review petition. The city objected to, for brevity, 3 different areas or different conditions identified in the permit. The first objection was in response to 3 separate conditions for the city to plug, abandon, and replace 3 monitoring wells 4, 5, and 6. The second objection was a requirement for quarterly testing for arsenic in one of the wells. And the third objection was noted on supply chain constraints that would make compliance with the conditions difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. As justification for our petition, the city included the verification of our contracted engineer, Mark DePauli. With regard to the monitoring well dispute, the city noted that this permit was most recently reissued in 2012, and in consultation with the Groundwater Quality Board Bureau, at that time, they agreed on a certain perforation zone for the monitoring well to ensure that those wells would always stay wet with water that could be sampled. This was based on a study from 2012 presented by DePauli Engineering. And it was taking into account the specific geology located at the site. There was evidence of confining aquifers, and the water level in that area can vary greatly. So the perforation zone did deviate from NMED standards, but was done so to ensure that those wells would always have viable testing samples present. The city, as further basis for this objection, noted that the Groundwater Quality Bureau did not consider or evaluate less burdensome options. The city requested a stay of these provisions because it was likely to succeed on appeal. It would face irreparable harm if it were required to comply with these requests in the form of lost revenue and misappropriation of public funds to comply with the permit. The city noted that there would be no harm to NMED if this stay were granted, The city noted that this permit had taken 6 years to review and did not see any damage in a few more weeks. And further stated there would be public harm in the form of misappropriation of public funds if this stay were not granted. The city could also be subject to violations of the Water Quality Control Act if it did not, or if it was unable to meet the terms of the granted permit. The city cited for the basis of these the Water Quality Control Commission's own rules requiring granting of a stay. It also cited in its reply the district court rules and the Tenneco factors as accepted by the New Mexico Court of Appeals. In response to that motion, NMED merely relied on a technicality that the Water Quality Control Commission rules pertain to rulemakings and not to motions under its adjudicatory procedures. NMED did not address any of the other merits of the city's request, so the city in reply noted that those responses are waived, and the department's lack of response constitutes an admission of those facts. Further, going back to the notice of appeal, we noted that the city is likely to prevail because NMED did not provide any justification for its variance from accepting the same information in 2012 and coming to a completely different conclusion in 2022. And we cited the Hobbs case that would require some justification for deviation from past practices. As a final note, the city would note that its interests and the interests of the Water Quality Control or of the Water Quality Control Commission and NMED are aligned. City of Gallup is highly reliant on groundwater and is greatly concerned about any impact that could potentially be there. It just feels at this point additional consideration should have been given to the justification, and at minimum, NMED needs to take additional evidence in this proceeding to justify its deviation from its past practice, which it has not supported. We would last note that in response to our motion for remand, NMED did note that proper procedures were filed and it considered that, or were followed, and NMED considered that the proper standard here. However, even if it did not reach an accurate result, the city does not dispute that procedures were followed here. However, the city had anticipated additional time to resolve this issue with NMED prior to the permit being issued. So once the permit was issued, the city properly and timely filed this pleading, and thinks that the best way to reach not just the proper process for the conclusion, but also an accurate result would be to remand this matter back to the division or the department, assign a hearing examiner, take any additional evidence as needed, and have the hearing examiner present a recommendation for the Water Quality Control Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. We'll turn the floor over to Council Atencio.
Thank you, Chair Stringer, members of the commission. I think there are a lot of different issues presented before the commission by the city in the form of two different motions, as well as the petition. I guess addressing the initial question first as to petition. The department does not dispute that the petition was timely filed or that those who have permitted or participated in a permit proceeding below can properly petition the commission for a review of that petition. So to that extent, the department is willing to proceed with the petition, or the permit review process as requested by the petitioner. Additionally, under the department's understanding of the procedures for that, that would be governed by both the applicable paragraphs in 7465 of the statutes, in particular 7465Q, and the commission's adjudicatory procedures found at 20.1.3.16 NMAC. Within that, the department appreciates the presentation this morning from the city, but to the extent that the certification that was included with the petition is intended to provide some kind of basis for the commission's decision in the petition, the department would object to that, as that is not part of the administrative record, but was filed subsequent to permit issuance. And the proceeding under the petition under 7465Q would be that the commission shall consider and weigh only the evidence contained in the record before the constituent agency, the recommended decision of the hearing officer, if any. So to the extent that that would be considered beyond that, the department would object. Addressing the motion for remand, the standard for motion for remand would be in 7465R. If a party shows to the satisfaction of the commission that there was no reasonable opportunity to submit comment or evidence on an issue being challenged, the commission shall order that additional comment or evidence be taken by the constituent agency. Now, the city's motion for remand in that appears to want to get right to the merits of the issue, to the either right or wrong determination by the department in the permitting issuance. Now, the department is not making any admissions as to whether its decision was right or wrong, merely that that is the subject of a permit review and should be properly considered after formal briefing by the parties as contemplated by the commission's permit review procedures. To that extent, there has been no demonstration that there was no opportunity to present evidence. The city did not request a hearing at which it could have provided evidence, submitted arguments, as well as cross-examined the department's witnesses. And so the city did provide comments by its own admission, as well as participate in meetings. So there was opportunity. There's been no demonstration that there was not opportunities to submit evidence in this permit proceedings. Now, that's separate from whether the department reached the right conclusion, which again would be up to the commissions to determine upon completion of formal briefing. As for the commission, or excuse me, the motion for stay, I think it kind of touches on the last, the subsequent, excuse me, the preceding motion, the motion for remand, and that the city is really asking for special treatment here. And there's established procedure. If you want to submit evidence, you can request a permit hearing. You don't have to, but you can. Similarly, there's an established procedure for permit reviews which do not contemplate a stay of the permit conditions. Now, in the initial motion, the city relied entirely upon the rulemaking procedures for the commission. And as we've heard several times this morning, there are separate procedures for separate proceedings before the commission. And rulemakings are not permit reviews. And so that provision is simply inapplicable. And in departing from that would create an exception, and where anybody requesting a permit review could simply pick and choose the procedures that it wanted to follow. The reference to the rules of civil procedure and those citations were made after the fact. And again, I would remind the commissioners that those are the commission is allowed to look at the rules of civil procedure as guidance, but those are definitely not controlling on the commission's proceedings. And I believe that's the extent of the department's response this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atencio. So the commissioners have before us a request for permit review and a motion for stay and remand. Do I have discussion from the commissioners or a proposed motion? Commissioner Brancard?
Do we need to address these separately? In other words, should we just try a motion to accept the permit review and then go from there on the other issues?
That's always the question. That is how we have handled it in the past. So I think that is the cleaner pathway. But before we proceed, we'll hear from Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the point that Commissioner Brancard brought up, that was exactly what was going through my mind. Is as I'm looking at this, there's really two actions for the commission to take today. One being the request for a permit review. In that, encompassed within that is the motion for remand, which would, a decision on remand would not be heard until the hearing was held, so that all parties weighed in on that motion. And I can be corrected if I'm wrong on that one. But the second item that the commission has before us today is a motion for stay, which I believe the commission would need to act on that motion separate from the petition for a permit review. So if that helps parse that out, I see those as two separate items, accepting the petition for review and scheduling a hearing, and then separately the motion for a stay on the conditions. Does that help weed out that path forward, Madam Chair?
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. You know, I think the regulations, because they require that the remand and the petition for review come in at the same time, just make that slightly confusing to some on how we make a decision on these motions. So I think they're connected in the fact that if we accept the request for review, therefore we're not remanding, and we can consider those together as one action by the commission. And then separately, we consider the stay. So I don't know, 2 or 3 actions, but I think to your point, we do need to take them stepwise. And based on how the motion is worded, that will guide our next steps. So I have an idea of how to handle that, but I will turn the floor over to Vice Chair Cipher.
Chair Stringer, do we have the capability, or should we consider the consequences of not offering a stay? In other words, is there a repercussion to the citizens of Gallup not receiving water?
So I will refer that question to the city of Gallup and Mr. Tencio to consider. Mr. Herman, would you please respond to that?
I'm not aware of any outcome from this case that would affect the ability of Gallup to deliver water. This permit again is, as I stated, dealing with the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant. And again, this permit has been in place since 1992.
Thank you for that. Mr. Tencio, do you have anything to add?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Seifert, does that?
That just made it super clear. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Brancard?
If we're addressing the review and remand initially, I have one question of council to begin with, which is the conditions that the city is objecting to. Were they part of the draft permit that was sent to the city when the city could have requested a hearing?
Yes, Mr. Examiner, they were. However, this permit had been pending for approximately 6 years, with some constant communication between the city and Gallup. And counsel for the city was only instructed to intervene after the initial request for hearing had passed. Constructively granting a remand and hearing to a hearing examiner would essentially put the city and the Groundwater Quality Bureau in the same position, only delayed by a few weeks, which, again, going by the timing of this permit, would not construe any actual harm.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Mr. Brancard, do you have any further questions?
I just a response from Mr. Atencio if he has one.
Okay, Mr. Atencio.
Commissioner Brancard, Chair Stringer, members of the commission, I don't disagree about the conditions being part of the draft. I think a remand, again, the standard for that was whether there's an opportunity to present evidence or not. In this case, there was. And functionally, what that would be some kind of public hearing, which, as the commission is well aware, public hearings are not generally a matter of a couple of weeks due to notice requirements or the things that can come up with that. I wouldn't say that's determinative or that the Bureau isn't well practiced in participating in those, but it's not a minor matter, and I would leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Atencio. Mr. Dominguez?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will digress on part of my earlier statements. In the past, the permit review and the motion for remand may have been handled one and the same. But with that said, I don't think there's any reason that the motion for remand not be handled separately. It, I think, can by all means be handled separately then from the permit review. So I just wanted to parse that out to maybe make it even more complicated, that we may have 3 actions in front of us rather than just 2.
Okay, thank you. Any motions or further discussion before we proceed? However, let's hear from Council Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Regarding the motion to stay, just I think by way of information, I think it's important for as counsel for NEMD pointed out, if the commission will look at the initial pleading filed by the city of Gallup, the motion to stay is under heading 6, and NEMD was correct in stating that the basis for the relief for the motion to stay is, as are the remaining allegations that go to that motion to stay. It's 20.1.6.401. And again, 20.6.4.401 has to do with, it's part of the commission's rulemaking proceedings, not the commission's adjudicatory proceedings. 20.1.6.401 has to do with a motion to say a rule or regulatory change. So everything that's in the petition pertaining to the motion to stay is misplaced. The arguments council has made today are incorrect. And perhaps what is of concern or should be of concern to the commission is the error is not technical, it's substantive. It's been pointed out to council for the city of Gallup. And I have seen nothing in the docket that where the city of Gallup is seeking to amend its petition to properly posture their request for a motion for a motion to stay. So my concern is, and I think it's NEMD's question as well, is whether a motion to stay has been properly pled by the city of Gallup, and therefore is it properly before the commission for consideration? Thank you.
Commission Chair, may I address that?
Yes, Mr. Herman, please respond.
Thank you, Commission. The city did address this in its reply. It noted that that distinction carries little weight because there is no provision within, and this was in the department's pleading as well, there's no provision within the 20.1.3 NMAC specifically addressing either a motion to stay or a motion to amend a pleading. Further, NMED has made no allegation that it was confused by the relief requested. It had an opportunity to respond to the arguments made by the city and opted not to. The specific rules on point are 20.1, excuse me, 20.1.38 NMAC, which allows the commission to look at the rules of civil procedure when for guidance when something is not on point. The rules of civil procedure dictate that there is no standard form for requesting a motion to stay, merely something that is sufficient to establish what is being requested and why it should be granted. The standards are all identical. So there was no failure, there was no lack of notice for the department to be able to respond to our arguments. The department simply chose not to. And lastly, this standard, in lack of a specific rule on point, was recognized again in the Court of Appeals, Tenneco Oil versus the New Mexico Water Control Commission, that recognized the Tenneco standards of likeliness to prevail on the appeal, lack of damage to any of the intervening parties or interested parties, evidence of public harm, and substantial harm to the or substantial harm either present or lack thereof to the parties. And the city supported this with a verified pleading. There has been no counter to the sworn statement by the city's engineer. So the commission therefore has no basis to reject the motion to stay, as we stated in our reply.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the commission's adjudicatory procedures rule, and specifically the 20.1.3.15, which is headed motions, that addresses all motions filed in regard to adjudicatory procedure. And that's what's been utilized by parties dealing with adjudicatory procedures issues where there's not a specific thing listed regarding a specific type of motion. It would be handled under 0.15. So the argument that there's nothing except the rules of civil procedures, I would disagree with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. Further discussion, comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Brancard.
I'd like to talk about the stay issue a little more detail, but how about we start moving forward here, and I'll make a motion to accept the review of the City of Gallup's petition.
Thank you. Do I have a second for that motion?
I would second that if I can bring up a point regarding timing of the permit hearing, which I think is applicable to discuss.
Yes, because also as part of that motion to accept the review, we would want to assign a hearing officer to consider that as well. So
do you just want a second and then go to discussion?
I'd like to hear your discussion first, is it may
Okay.
impact the original motion, potentially. I'm not sure.
I think it may help at least get a path forward for the permit review. So looking at the timing of when the request was made and when the commission has to make a decision, which is the commission's under a 90-day timeline. The hearing would need to start on December 12th, which is the day before our regular December WQCC meeting, unless the parties waive the 90-day deadline. And I don't believe, unless I've missed it, that I have seen a request for a waiver of the 90-day timeline. So we would be having to set up a special meeting in order for the commission to actually meet their obligations of the timelines under the Water Quality Acts and regulations. So that's the issue at hand that I see, although it's not something that can't be overcome, but it's still an issue we need to address. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. Yes, I had noticed that there was not a request to waive that 90-day timeline as well, and I know Council Sanchez wanted to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a point of procedure, of parliamentary procedure, you don't have, as I recall, a second on the motion. So I think discussion prior to a second, in other words, before the motion is viable, is putting the cart before the horse proverbially. So I think we need a second on that motion. Okay.
That's why you were anxious to stop that discussion from Commissioner Dominguez. So I apologize for that procedural issue. So we don't have a second. So we've got a motion on the table right now to accept the permit review. Commissioner Dominguez?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would second the motion, primarily so we can keep this moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And now it's the opportunity for further discussion, having heard the discussion that we just heard from you. Further discussion, comments? Okay, so it looks like we've got the motion to accept the permit review on the table, noting the timeline requirements for that permit review to occur. Pam, shall we have a roll call vote on that motion?
Okay, Commissioner Brankard, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Commissioner Dominguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Yes.
Commissioner Patton?
Yes.
Commissioner Rader?
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner Vigil?
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik?
Yes.
And Chair Stringer?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so now got a lot of steps to this process. We've agreed to the permit review. We need to consider an appointment of a hearing officer and an assessment of the 90-day waiver. Mr. Herman or Mr. Atencio, do you have any comments or discussion on the point of waiving the 90-day timeline?
Madam Chair, the city has no objection to any waiver to accommodate the city or the department schedule.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Atencio?
Chair Stringer, members of the commission, the department likewise has no objection and is willing to waive that 90-day deadline to facilitate scheduling.
Okay, thank you. So do I have a motion to appoint hearing officer? Go ahead, Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to make this as simple and generic as possible. I would make a motion that the chair of the commission, on behalf of the commission, appoint a hearing officer that fits all the other schedules necessary for hearing officers. And that the hearing officer work with the parties to come up with a timeline for an actual hearing date.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. Commissioner Brankard?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Do we have discussion on the motion?
Madam Chair, just to help with that process. I think, and the hearing officer can actually handle this part. But I believe the 90-day waiver, we usually handle those as a written request, although they verbally indicated today, but I believe that is something that the hearing officer could handle of accepting that waiver once the hearing officer is appointed and can be just handled as a procedural matter.
Correct. I would have I anticipated that that would have had to occur more formally as well. I just kind of wanted to hear the sort of response from the parties. And I believe the hearing officer would also address the request for stay once appointed. Council Sanchez, any comments?
Madam Chair, I would agree with both you and Commissioner Dominguez. What we did in the last similar proceeding is we gave the hearing officer discretion to set the hearing date to accommodate scheduling matters, those sorts of things, and also provided in the order for the hearing officer to obtain a formal waiver of the 90-day deadline if the timeline that was being developed so required. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Sanchez. Do we need to formally incorporate any point on the stay into the motion? That question was for you, Council Sanchez.
Oh, no, ma'am. No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think the order will encompass all matters that come before the commission that aren't dispositive and require a formal vote by the commission.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Excuse me. Commissioner Brankert, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams,
Yes.
Commissioner Patton,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil,
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik,
Yes.
Chair Stringer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, we have the motion to remand on our table to bring closure to as well. Do I have discussion or motion from any of the commissioners? Oh, Commissioner Brankard.
I'll give it a try. So our standard is whether there was an issue that there was no opportunity to present evidence on below. I don't think that the petitioner has demonstrated that. I think they simply want to have a chance to work together with the department. The department doesn't seem willing to do that. And so therefore, I move that we deny the motion to remand.
Thank you. I will second that motion. That motion. Further discussion, comments? Seeing none, Pam, shall we have a roll call vote on the motion to deny the remand?
Commissioner Brankert, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams,
Yes.
Commissioner Patton,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader,
Yes.
Vice Chair Cipher,
Yes.
thank you. Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Vehil,
Yes.
Commissioner Zemlik,
Yes.
Chair Stringer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. I believe that concludes our agenda item number 10 for today. Thank you, Mr. Herman and Mr. Atencio. Commissioner Brancard.
Well, I was just wondering, since we have this whole motion to stay fully briefed, whether the commission should address it or we should just sort of rely on the hearing officer to deal with the issue.
Any discussion from other commissioners on their thoughts on this request? Commissioner Dominguez?
Yeah, I thank you, Madam Chair. I tend to somewhat agree with Commissioner Brancard that the city seemed to imply that time was of the essence with this motion to stay, and whether the commission should actually take that up today to settle it one way or the other. Granted that, yeah, the hearing officer could handle that down the road, but we've heard discussion from both parties and from our legal counsel. And it could be that the commission can address things and get that off the table at this point in time. I would not be opposed to just taking care of it with the commission today.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. Further comments or discussion on this point?
Madam Chair, if I may just provide some background on the deadlines we're pending.
Yes, please, Mr. Herman.
The deadline to begin installing and plugging and abandoning the new wells pursuant to the permit is 180 days. If we do waive the 90-day requirement, though 180 days might seem pretty far from right now, depending when the hearing is held, we could be in a timing issue, and the city definitely does not want to run the risk of any potential permit violations under the Water Quality Act.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Atencio.
Thank you, Chair Stringer, members of the commission. I think it's worth noting that even though the department does not support alternative procedural patterns for permit reviews, the Groundwater Quality Bureau can and has been willing to entertain extensions to specific permit conditions as necessary. I don't believe there's been a request for an extension as yet, but that's something the Bureau could definitely contemplate if that request was made.
Thank you, Mr. Atencio. Commissioner Dominguez.
Mr. Atencio sort of headed down the path that I had the question of, that since a permit review has been, the request for review has been approved by the commission, that once that process is sort of started, if the permit as a whole was strictly enforced, or if it was somewhat held in abeyance until the permit review process was actually completed. And I think Mr. Atencio sort of headed down that path. It was always my assumption that things may not be overly enforced while the review process was proceeding.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez. Yeah, I see that it could be addressed either through the motion to stay by the hearing officer or that extension request. So there are a couple of options available. Commissioner Brancard.
Yes, and thank you. That actually brings up a point I was going to make here, which is council has in their brief referred to the Tenneco case, which is now sort of part of the law in the rules of appellate procedure and civil procedure, which states that basically if you're appealing an agency action and you want to stay, you have to ask the agency first for a stay. And so in this matter, that would mean that they need to be asking the department or the bureau for the stay first before they really come to us. If the bureau it doesn't want to give them any stay, says deadlines are deadlines, then they can come to us and ask for a stay. So I think that's the way the wording of the Tenneco case works out. That really they need to first make an attempt with the department for a stay or whatever accommodation. And if that doesn't work out, then they can come to us and ask for a stay.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Brancard. And it sounds like the department is amenable to granting that request. So that leads me to believe the commission does not need to act on the stay at this meeting today. Further discussion, comments? Okay. Seeing none, I think now we can close out agenda item number, oh, maybe not. Council Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick thought. If the department and the city of Gallup agree on the stay of the proceedings, so we don't have what seems to be now a growing graveyard of motions that are just kind of sitting on the docket. Perhaps if they reach an agreement, they can withdraw that motion and we can have a conclusion on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that suggestion, Council Sanchez. Mr. Herman, would you be amenable to withdrawing that motion?
Madam Chair, assuming my understanding is correct that the pending deadlines within the permit would be stayed during the pendency of the permit review, yes, we would be amenable to withdrawing our motion for stay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Atencio.
Thank you, Chair Stringer. My clients informed me that the Bureau would be amenable to agree to base compliance on the conditions, but specifically the conditions that are at issue in the permit review, based on the date of the WQCC's final determination, essentially extending that deadline for compliance 180 days from the date of that final decision.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments or discussion on agenda item number 10?
Madam Chair, if I may just add while we're discussing the permit conditions, the condition number 27 regarding quarterly testing for arsenic also has a quarterly requirement. I haven't had an opportunity to discuss that with the city, but we would hope that would also be included in this.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Mr. Atencio, do you have a response?
I think, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I'll need to correspond with Mr. Herman offline to clarify that point and make sure I get a clear direction from the Bureau as to its position on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, further comments or discussion? Last call. Okay, with that, we can conclude agenda item number 10 and proceed to agenda item number 11. I know we're kind of getting to the lunch hour and people probably need a break to get something to eat. And this next item could be big, or lengthy, I should say. And so I know there's an opportunity for the commission to go into closed session for these deliberations. So Council Sanchez, I'm not sure if you turned your camera on to speak to that aspect of our next agenda item. But perhaps we can consider that decision and then break for lunch. Council
Madam
Sanchez.
Chair, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, as you've suggested in your comments just now, looking at the agenda item, it provides for the possibility that the commission might go into executive session. So I just have a logistical question. Typically, with other agencies, the way that's done is there's a separate WebEx or Zoom link for the commission to meet in executive session. I'm not sure how we would be doing that in this case. Perhaps Pam can speak to that. If the commission were to go into executive session, since we have basically an open link at this point.
Right. Pam, can you speak to the ability to go into a subgroup through this application?
Yes, there's an ability to create a breakout session, and during this break, I can do that. What that essentially does is it takes the commissioners and puts them in a private room. If that's not something you want to do, then again, during the break, I can set up a separate WebEx link and send it just to the commission. And then we can keep this room open, sign on to the other one, and go into executive session that way.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like we do have the ability to create a closed session through the web application should the commission desire to do so. And then just for transparency's sake, Council Sanchez, if you could just walk us through how the procedural matters would occur. We would go into closed session and then how we would inform the public of the final decision, if you would please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The relevant statute is 10-15-1 of the Open Meetings Act, and particularly subsection I-1. And I'll read from it. It says, if any meeting is closed pursuant to the exclusions, one of which is provided for in the or listed in the agenda, shall be approved by a majority vote of the quorum of the policymaking body. So it would require a roll call vote. And then also requires the motion to state the authority for the closure, which would be the 10-15-1H3 that you've cited. And the subject matter to be discussed has to be stated with reasonable specificity. So again, the motion would have to reasonably specify what would be discussed in closed session. And then again, the vote itself is taken when the commission reconvenes in open session. And the standard practice is for you to state the time that the commission goes into executive session, and to also state for the record that only the subjects announced or voted upon prior to the closure may be discussed in the closed or executive session. That's it, Commissioner. I'm rather, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So is there any discussion on the commission's decision or motion to go into executive session for the deliberations of discharge permit 873? Okay.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, Commissioner Thompson.
On other boards that I sit on, the only opportunity for, or the only justification for closed session is when we are either facing potential litigation or we are dealing with personnel issues. What would be the justification for going into closed session on this particular agenda item?
Madam Chair, I can speak to that.
Yes, please, Council Sanchez.
Commissioner, the agenda states as the reason, if you will, or statutory justification is section 1015(1)(h)(3) of the Open Meetings Act. And I'll read what that is. It's deliberations by a public body, of which the commission is, in connection with an administrative adjudicatory proceeding, of which this is one as well. And for purposes of this paragraph, administrative adjudicatory proceeding means a proceeding brought by or against a person before a public body in which individual rights, duties, or privileges are required by law to be determined by the public body after an opportunity for a trial type hearing. I'll make the qualification that here, because of the nature of the proceeding, there wasn't a trial type hearing, but there were oral arguments before the commission. So that is the statutory justification on which the commission is relying to go into executive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Sanchez.
Any further discussion, Commissioner Brancart or Commissioner Dominguez? You both have your camera on. Don't know if that indicates a comment or not. Commissioner Dominguez?
Get my computer off and mute here. And I'm unsure if you're just wanting to have the discussion here or if you're actually looking for the motion, or if the motion would come when we reconvene so that you've got statutory language in front of us to adequately put that on the record. But regarding going into executive session, the commission has handled things both ways, depending on the given matter and the type of discussion that may take place. Some commissioners tend to lean towards the public transparency aspect for deliberations. Other commissioners have tended to lean towards the side that if where this body has really sticky issues before it and want to have an open and frank discussion, that typically people are more willing to speak up in executive session than they may be in an open forum that's being transcribed or recorded and could wind up being part of the Court of Appeals record of what was said during deliberations. So there's two theories of thoughts of going into executive session. I just throw that out there because I know we have a lot of new commissioners on board that may or may not help them with their thought process.
Correct. And I see Ms. Davis, I'm sorry, I forget your rank to speak to you that way, but please provide your comment.
That's okay, ma'am. It's Major Davis, but that's fine. And I have Major Senator with me as well. So I don't know if the parties have an opportunity to weigh in here, but if so, reading the statute that was cited by Council Sanchez, I don't think that we had a trial type hearing in this case because we didn't present any evidence outside of the administrative record and there were no witnesses called. So I'm not sure that it would fall under that or qualify for the closed meeting session from our perspective.
Thank you, Major Davis, for that comment. And it's not to say that we're going in that direction as of yet, but perhaps this is a good pause point so the commissioners can think about this decision when we return from a lunch break. And I'd like to let everyone have that opportunity to get some food in them before we proceed with this matter. So I am going to call the time at 12:50 and we can reconvene at is late lunch, 1:50 and continue these matters. Thank you. Okay. With that, the Water Quality Control Commission has reconvened following our break for lunch. And Pam, shall we take a roll call to ensure we have a quorum to proceed? And I also want to note that Commissioner Cipher let me know he has a hard stop at 2, so I don't think he's returning after lunch.
Okay, yeah, that's what I understood as well. I'll call him for the record anyway.
Sure.
We will see. We will start with Commissioner Brancard. Are you present?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Dominguez?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Fry?
Here.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Here.
Commissioner Patton? Commissioner Rader?
Here.
Vice Chair Cipher? Commissioner Thompson?
I'm here.
Commissioner Vigil?
Here.
Commissioner Zemlik?
Here.
And Chair Stringer?
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Pam. So the next item on our agenda is number 11, WQCC case 22-01 in the matter of the petition for permit review of discharge, permit renewal, and modification of DP 873. Prior to the break, we were discussing that the commission seemingly has the option to go into a closed session. And I guess the first matter to go over, sorry, is whether or not any commissioners have a desire to consider going into closed session or if we shall proceed in our open meeting. So I will open the floor for discussion from any commissioners. Commissioner Brancard, did you want to say something?
I would just say that I would support going into executive session.
Okay, thank you. I see Council Sanchez has turned his camera on. Is that an indication to comment?
No, Madam Chair, I have no comment, other than that cautionary note about that language about a trial type process in the exception.
So we have one indication of support for going into executive session. I believe I need a motion in order to consider that officially. So Commissioner Brancard, did you want to move to go into executive session?
Sure. Chair, I move that the Water Quality Control Commission go into executive session to deliberate item number 11, WQCC 2201, as an administrative adjudicatory proceeding under the Open Meetings Act exception, section 10-15-1H3.
Do I have a second for the motion, Commissioner Dominguez?
Madam Chair, I would second that motion.
Okay, any discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, Commissioner Thompson.
I would oppose the motion. I think that we're a deliberative body that answers to the public, and I would prefer that we have our comments available to them.
Thank you. Any further comments, discussion? Pam, I think we need, Major Davis, I see that you have your hand up, but I don't believe we can take any comments from you at this time, so we'll proceed with our roll call vote for the motion.
Okay, for the motion to go into a closed session, Commissioner Brankard, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Fry?
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams?
Yes.
Commissioner Patton? Commissioner Rader?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson?
No.
Commissioner Vigil?
Yes.
Commissioner Zimlick?
No.
Chair Stringer?
No.
Okay, Madam Chair, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 votes in the affirmative and 3 in the negative. The motion passes.
Thank you. Council Sanchez, did you want to make a comment there? I never know if you're raising your hand by turning your camera on or not. I'm sorry.
No, Madam Chair, I have no comments on, but we are getting, but we're getting a real, at least I'm getting an echo from you, from your voice. There's a reverberation or an echo.
Okay. Well, if I don't know if it's an issue because other people are unmuted, but if I could ask everyone to mute if you're not speaking, I'm hoping that will help. Otherwise.
It did, thank you.
Okay, great.
Just one couple of things. One, if you'll note the time, the commission is going into executive session, and also a reminder for all the commissioners to mute their microphones on this connection so it won't cross over to the executive session. Thank you.
Okay, so Pam, logistically speaking, Pam sent all of us a new link for the closed session. So we would log on to that via the link that she provided. We would, I don't know if we have to restate the references to go into closed session. Got so many documents open here. I lost my Open Meetings Act page. But we would go into the closed session, and then the commission meeting remains open. We would, upon completion of that, go back into the open meeting to state our final decision. Correct, Council Sanchez?
Madam Chair, that's correct. And you would also want to state for the record that only the matters that were contained in the motion were discussed during executive or closed session.
Okay. So with that, the commissioners shall go into, oh, we have a comment from Commissioner Fry before we go into closed session.
Actually, I have a question about logistics. So do we leave this meeting and then go into that link, or do we keep this open?
So do we log off? So do we exit this meeting is what you're asking?
Correct.
Commissioner, you can do either. It's your preference. If it's really hard for you to log back onto the open session, you can go ahead and leave it open. But again, some personal computers are real finicky. They may not like both to be open. But in any event, if you leave this open, please mute your microphone and perhaps close your video, stop your video.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we will, the commissioners will go into a closed session for the deliberation in the matter of WQCC 22-01, the permit review deliberations of the discharge permit renewal and modification for DP 873. And we will return to the open meetings upon completion, and only those matters will be discussed. I see Pam has something to share.
I just wanted to confirm with you, do you need staff support in the executive session?
No meeting minutes are taken during a closed session, so unless we run into technical difficulties, which I'll let you know one way or the other. If we do, I don't believe we need administrative support for that. Commissioner Brancard.
You might want to announce that you'll check into the larger group, say in an hour or.
And let them know where we are so they have an
Yeah.
idea. Okay. Thank you for that guidance. Having not ever gone into a closed session as commission chair, those are some of the questions I had. So thanks. So yes, we will periodically log back into this open meetings link if we're logged out and kind of give an update on progress and maybe an anticipated completion time if we have that available to us based on our deliberations. Council Sanchez?
One small, again, housekeeping item. If you'll note the time the commission is going into executive session for the record, please.
Okay. So at 2:02 p.m. on October 11th, the Water Quality Control Commission is going into executive session. We will return at approximately 3 o'clock to provide an update.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am confirming that the closed session of the Water Quality Control Commission ended at 4:37. We are back in open session, continuing item 11 on the agenda. Sorry, pulling out my papers. In regarding the matter of the petition for permit review of discharge permit renewal and modification for DP 873. Go ahead, Council Sanchez. I think I was about to say what you wanted me to say.
I'll wait then. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to confirm that during the closed session, this is the only matter that was discussed during that session of the closed session of the Water Quality Control Commission. Okay. Just a little slow to get there. Okay. So I think we're ready to consider a motion in our deliberations on this matter. Commissioner Brancard.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying that the commission reviewed the record, reviewed the hearing officer's recommended decision, and went through the Water Quality Act relevant provisions and relevant provisions in the commission's rules of procedures to determine compliance. Section 74-6-5Q provides that the commission shall consider and weigh only the evidence contained in the record before the constituent agency. Section 74-6-5-R provides a process for allowing for additional evidence or comment to be reviewed by the constituent agency if directed by the commission. In this matter, an initial motion to remand was denied because it failed to comply with the commission's procedural rules. But later, the hearing officer in this matter issued an order on June 29, 2022 to supplement the record based on the language in 74-6-5-R. However, that evidence was never sent back to the constituent agency for its review. Therefore, I move that the commission order that the additional evidence admitted into the record by the hearing officer be reviewed by the constituent agency, and the constituent agency take whatever actions necessary in its review to work with the parties. And then based on the review of this information, promptly file with the commission all the evidence that it received and any actions it's taken in response to receiving that evidence, including amending the permit documents. Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson. I second the motion.
Whoops. You can hear me, right?
Now can.
Okay. Sorry about that. I pushed the button. I must have pushed it twice by accident. Thank you for your motion and for the second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Pam, shall we have a roll call vote on this motion?
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Brankert, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Fry,
Yes.
Commissioner McWilliams,
Yes.
Commissioner Patton,
Yes.
Commissioner Rader, Commissioner Vice Chair Cipher, Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Vigil, Commissioner Vigil, have you joined us? Commissioner Zemlik,
Yes.
Chair Stringer.
Yes.
Let me ask again for Commissioner Vigil. Okay, Madam Chair, the motion passes. Oh, wait.
That was 8, right?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, we have 8 votes.
Okay. That constitutes a quorum, so the motion passes, like you said, Pam. Sorry. Okay, that concludes our agenda item number 11. Going on to the next agenda item, which is the next meeting and expected upcoming matters. So far, based on, just a moment, Mr. Atencio, based on earlier discussion, we have identified one agenda item to review the process for adopting TMDLs by the Commission. Mr. Atencio, did you have a comment on an upcoming matter?
Thank you, Chair Stringer. I just wanted to clarify on the last agenda item that there would be a written order issued from the Commission to make sure that I understood the Commission's direction completely based on that motion.
Yes, Mr. Atencio, there will be an order drafted for that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any other items to note for upcoming meetings? Not for upcoming meetings, but specifically the November meeting.
I don't have any, Madam Chair.
Okay. I haven't noted anything yet either, aside from the one that came up earlier today. So with that, we'll move on to adjourning today's meeting of the Water Quality Control Commission. Thank you all for your attendance and your patience during our closed session, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much. The meeting is adjourned.